Chapter 189. Everyone felt a little depressed when they heard this. This is the goddess of fortune's arrangement. It's our fault for not following the Devers back then. Tormid sighed. The Devers are indeed God's chosen. It's only been half a year and they've created such a huge business. It's not too late for us to follow them. Hearing Tormid's words, Xantiparis, who was already old, looked up at the silent starry sky. A wave of sadness welled up in his heart. I don't know how you all feel. I'm old, and I'm tired of wandering around and killing nonstop. I'm afraid there won't be a tomorrow after today. It's not bad to settle down here. After saying this, everyone fell silent. All right, everyone, don't think about the future. Think about how to smoothly pick up your other companions and stop them from causing trouble. Otherwise, we'll be in trouble. Timothy reminded everyone worriedly. Timothy's worries were confirmed the next morning. Before Timothy and the others arrived at the port, they learned that more than a dozen outsiders were robbing the market. They even had a conflict with the managers who rushed over and injured some people. They were only arrested when the market patrol team, a total of 50 people, a team, arrived. Timothy rushed over to take a look. It was indeed their mercenaries. In the end, they invited Agathia, who compensated them and made a promise. The mercenaries who committed the crime were sentenced to a month of labor. Only then did the matter come to an end. To prevent such a thing from happening again, Timothy and the others rented a house at the port and waited there. Even so, conflicts began to increase every day. Most of them were related to these mercenaries. Some elders even proposed to expel these mercenaries from the alliance and restore peace to the alliance. In the end, Agathia, Antonio, Capus, and the others objected, but it still put some pressure on the Devers. Time passed quickly. At the end of November, the shipyard in Enanolus was completed. The Devers and the other elders came to congratulate the shipyard and placed in order 3 three-decker or warships. The establishment of the Dionysian fleet as soon as possible had been put on the agenda by the Senate to protect the increasingly prosperous ports and maritime trade of the Dionia alliance. At the same time, it was necessary to change the awkward fact that the Dionia alliance did not have a fleet and was even weaker than its two allies. At the beginning of December, the assembly hall of the Senate of Thurii was completed. Finally, the sad history of the senators having to travel to Amendola whenever they had an important meeting came to an end. It was a waste of energy and secrecy, and the coachman took advantage of them. At the same time, the Thurii-Castellan Avenue was completed on land, except for the bridge over the Kratai River, which was still under construction. The Thurii Arena Plaza was about to be completed. Just as the good news came from all the construction sites, a small cargo ship with a big symbol embroidered on its sail entered Greece's Taranto Bay. When the passing ships saw the symbol, they took the initiative to make way for it. Phoebidas, the Sparta general who had just turned 30, took it for granted. He ordered the helmsman to steer straight to the port of Thurii without any hesitation. In the western Mediterranean, Sparta had the most dealings with Syracuse, so it knew something about Sicily. Most of the Spartans didn't know much about Greece. Apart from seeing athletes from the Greek city-states during the sports meet, they didn't have much contact with them. True Spartan citizens couldn't do business, and they didn't have any trade relations with the Greek city-states. Thus, after entering this sea area, Phoebidas sized up everything around him with great interest. After looking at the port of Thurii for a while, he said to his attendant Dorobysus, "There are quite a lot of merchant ships here. I think it's about the same as Corinth." Dorobysus was a Pariasi. Pariasi were also Lacidians, but they were not citizens of Sparta. Most of them lived on the border of Laconia. They had personal freedom and the right to deal with local affairs, but they had no political rights in Sparta. In the past, they mainly engaged in trade that Sparta citizens could not do. But now, due to the long years of war, the number of Sparta citizens dwindled, and the Pariasi began to join the army. Because of his different occupation, Dorobisus had a liveliness that was rarely seen in Sparta. He looked at the Kratai estuary and deliberately asked, "The port of Corinth is not as lively as it is here. Phoebidas, you should ask me, how does it compare to Athens?" At the mention of Athens, Phoebidas's face darkened. Originally, after the defeat of Athens, Lysander established the Council of 30 in Athens in an attempt to control the political situation in Athens. Although some people in Athens rebelled, if Sparta fully supported this puppet council, the people in Athens who rebelled would not be able to do anything. However, King Pausanias and the elders led by Diopetius were not on good terms with Lysander. Not only did they deprive Lysander of his military command, they also pushed the elders' council to negotiate peace with the Democrats in Athens. In the end, the Democrats in Athens overthrew the Council of 30 and established a new democratic regime. Also, the Athens government, which had learned a painful lesson, became more flexible in its policies. On one hand, it tried to please Sparta, on the other hand, it tried to restore trade and agriculture after the war. Only a few years had passed, and the trade in Athens had begun to flourish again. Phoebidas snorted and said no more. At this time, the Dionia patrol ship came to greet them. Phoebidas said loudly, "I'm the messenger of Sparta, and I want to see the consul of the alliance." The patrol ship did not dare to delay and immediately sailed back to the city of Turin. Diplomatic affairs such as Sparta's visit were, of course, handled by the Senate. There were more than 50 senators in the Senate, but it was impossible for them to stay in the council hall every day. This was because it was not every day that a meeting of the Senate's senators would happen. Moreover, many of the senators had official duties, so the Devers adopted a rotation system. Every 5 senators would be on duty in the council hall for one day, and the other 5 would be replaced the next day. When the patrol ship hurriedly sent the news to the council hall, the Devers had already received an urgent report from Aristyras in their courtyard. The messenger of Sparta was here. The Devers frowned and immediately thought that Sparta might be here for Timicin. Soon, the patrol ship returned to the estuary and signaled for Sparta's warships to follow it. Before coming here, Phoebidas did not know much about Turin. He did not know that the city of Turin and the port were not together. This was somewhat similar to Athens, but there were no city walls connecting the port and the city, so if a war broke out, the port could easily be occupied. Phoebidas looked at everything in front of him from a military perspective. There is no river like this in Athens, and look at the flat terrain. The soil should be very fertile. The agriculture in Turin must be good. Dorobisus observed from an economic perspective. After sailing for a few miles, Phoebidas saw the towers on both sides of the Turin and the iron chains hanging in the air across the cloddy river. Phoebidas knew that once the enemy's fleet broke through the estuary and went up the North River, the iron chains would be lowered to block the warships from entering the city. The patrol ship finally entered the pier on the north bank. Phoebidas noticed that the pier, the bridges, and the houses on the shore were all clean and tidy. Only the pier at the edge was scorched black, so Dorobisus asked the captain of the patrol ship curiously. "That's what our consul, Sir Divers, wants us to preserve it. It's everywhere in the city, including the temple. He wants every citizen to see these ruins no matter where they go. It's a constant reminder to ourselves that this city was once burned down by invaders. We must remember this great shame and not let Tulii be bullied again. Only victory can restore its former glory. Just a few days ago, we repaired one of the ruins because we obtained Nudum." Looking at the captain's solemn and proud expression, Phoebidas did not seem to care, but his heart was touched. At this moment, a group of guards walked over. Phoebidas observed their mental state and every movement. He could tell that this was a group of well-trained, disciplined soldiers, and definitely had plenty of actual combat experience. To be honest, other than the citizens of Sparta, he had never seen patrols in their own cities that could maintain a good formation and be ready for battle at any time. He was a little surprised. The captain handed over his duties to the patrol captain, Olivers, and sailed away. Your soldiers must stay on the ship. Please come with me to the Senate. Olivers said to Phoebidas sternly, the Alliance has a rule that foreign soldiers are not allowed to enter the city. They are Sparta warriors. They can freely enter and leave any Greek city-state. Phoebidas said in a loud and righteous voice. Although it was an exaggeration, many of the Greek cities in the eastern Mediterranean did have this privilege, so many of the cities were dissatisfied with it. Olivers looked at him and said disapprovingly, I know who you are. I don't care what you do in other cities, but as long as you step on the land of the city alliance of Dionia, you must obey our laws. Phoebidas was extremely angry, but the patrol captain, Olivers, did not give in. He had a firm expression that said, either you obey the alliance's rules, or you leave the alliance's territory. In the end, Dorabitius compromised and allowed the Sparta warriors to change into civilian clothes before they were allowed to pass. Chapter 190. Generally speaking, the most impressive buildings in a Greek city-state were temples, arenas, theaters, and other large buildings. At this moment, Phoebidas and his entourage had yet to see many large buildings, but they were already impressed by the meticulous design and clean city. Phoebidas had been to Athens, a city famous for the Mediterranean Sea. Although prosperous, it was noisy and dirty. Sparta was quiet, but the entire city was as simple as a village. Only in Thurii, simplicity, generosity, elegance, tranquility, and cleanliness were mixed together and had a full charm. Dorabitius could not help but ask, who was the designer of this city? Heraclides, the disciple of Hippodamos. Olivers saw the surprised look on their faces and answered loudly. "O Hippodamos!" Dorabitius exclaimed. The name was not unfamiliar to the Sparta people, because he was the one who designed and built the Piraeus harbor. It had created a lot of wealth for Athens, and Sparta had gone through a lot of trouble to seize it back then. As they moved forward, they saw a huge white arch across the street. Sparta had never seen such an arch in any other city-state. Dorabitius asked curiously, "What is this arch used for?" Captain Olivers's expression turned solemn. He said in a low voice, "This is the Arch of Triumph. The victorious generals and soldiers will march through this arch to receive the greetings and cheers of the archons, Senate elders, and the citizens of the alliance. There was a triumphal parade not long ago. Because we seized Nudum, the scene was really... Sigh, it's a pity that our first brigade will have to wait for the next time." Phoebidas did not look at Olivers's regretful expression. He and the few Sparta warriors behind him looked up at the giant arch, shock and envy in their eyes. As a warrior, wasn't the greatest wish to win the cheers of their own city-state after defeating the enemy? That would make them feel that their blood and sacrifice were sacred and meaningful. But in the Greek polis, where democracy prevailed, this was hardly the case. The Democrats believed that this would give the generals too much prestige and lead to dictatorship. Even though Sparta was founded on military might, the old elders would never allow the young and bloodthirsty Sparta warriors to get out of control. Lysander was the best example. And now, a colonial city-state in the remote western Mediterranean outside the Greek mainland actually did this, and will continue to do so. Phoebidas had mixed feelings. He did not want to talk to the patrol captain before, but now he asked, "How often do you have military training? Why are you asking this?" Captain Olivers's expression was serious. He thought for a moment and said, "But there's no harm in telling you. Our alliance citizens train once every 7 days during the busy farming season. Now that it's the slack season, we train once every 2 to 3 days, and we train for an entire day each time." Such frequent military training had already surpassed most of the Greek city-state. No wonder these soldiers looked well trained. This was also a city-state that valued military strength. Phoebidas had a hunch that it would be difficult to achieve his purpose of coming here. Passing through the wide and flat Victory Square, After the triumphal procession, the newly built square finally had its own name. Since the main function of the square was to gather troops before the battle and hold the triumphal procession after the battle, the name Victory was well deserved. Phoebidas entered the Grand Turii Senate chamber. The chamber was so large that it could probably accommodate thousands of people. Therefore, the dozens of members of the Senate sitting in the front row looked very inconspicuous. Seeing Phoebidas coming in, all the senators stood up and applauded him. They also bowed respectfully to show their respect for Sparta. This finally made Phoebidas feel a sense of satisfaction. The young man in the lead said, "Welcome, envoy of Sparta from afar. What prompted you to come to the Dionia alliance?" This must be the military genius that the young archon of the Dionysian alliance mentioned by Chrysippus. Perhaps the Arch of Triumph was also his handiwork. Phoebidas looked at him with sharp and aggressive eyes. The Devers did not avoid his gaze. They also looked back at him with deep eyes, as if they wanted to see through his intentions. In the eyes of the Devers, this Sparta man was wearing a bright scarlet cloak. He had long hair that was unusual for ordinary Greek. His rough face not only had scars, but he also had arrogance that despised everything. The Devers, who had a deeper understanding of this era, now felt that the envoy in front of them was the normal appearance of the Sparta people when facing outsiders. Callisops was an exception. The two men faced each other and stared at each other coldly. The atmosphere suddenly became tense. Cunagurata coughed twice, trying to break the tense atmosphere. Phoebidas spoke. He went straight to the point and said, "I'm here on behalf of Sparta to denounce the Dionia alliance." As soon as he said this, the elders were in an uproar. In order to protect the Greek city-states in Asia Minor, as well as the interests of all of Greece, we, Sparta, sent our army across the Aegean Sea to Asia Minor to fight against the Persia. However, at the critical moment, some of our soldiers were lured away from the battlefield in Asia Minor by you, which caused the war against the Persia to be thwarted. Even the governor, Tiburon, was banished by the Council of Elders. Therefore, the Council of Elders has sent me to denounce you for this traitorous act. So serious? The elders looked at each other, slightly nervous. "I don't understand." Cunagurata asked doubtfully, "You said we lured your soldiers away. The Dionia alliance is thousands of miles away from Asia Minor. We have little contact with Sparta. How could we lure your soldiers away?" "You're right. As a newly established alliance, not only do we have no contact with Sparta, we don't even know where Asia Minor is," Plesinas said exaggeratedly. Phoebidas acted as if he didn't hear anything. He just looked at Divers and sneered. "Those soldiers are mercenaries who participated in the Persian expedition. They fought together with your archons and some of you for more than a year in Persia. We have a deep relationship with them. Our officers in Asia Minor have seen foreigners frequently entering the camps of these mercenaries. Agathia saw Antonios, Capys, and the others secretly looking at him with questioning eyes. He shook his head gently. "Are you sure these foreigners are citizens of our alliance?" Antonios asked. "I'm sure that the passenger ships these deserters took all sailed to Greece." Phoebidas said firmly, "Therefore, the Sparta Elder Council has made a decision. The Dionia alliance must hand over all the mercenaries who escaped here, and—" he raised his voice, "as punishment for the Dionia alliance destroying Sparta's war against Persia, your archons are required to lead 5,000 soldiers to Asia Minor and join Sparta's army against Persia." "What?" The elders were shocked. "What kind of logic is this? The Dionia alliance has no diplomatic relations with Sparta. What gives you Sparta the right to give us orders?" "Because you, as Greeks, destroyed Sparta's holy war against Persia on behalf of Greece. Because we, Sparta, are the leader of all Greece," Phoebidas said proudly. Devers laughed out loud. Hearing the disdain in his laughter, the agitated elders immediately calmed down. Merces even asked, "Master Devers, what are you laughing at?" I'm laughing at how shameless Sparta is. Devers glanced at Phoebidas with disdain. Didn't Sparta collude with Persia, who has always been the enemy of Greece, and kill their own people to defeat Athens? Now, why did Sparta start a war with Persia? Why? Merces quickly asked. I heard that in order to get Persia to help it defeat Athens, Sparta signed an agreement with Persia, agreeing to give up the protection of the city-states in Asia Minor and give them to Persia. After the war was won, Sparta went back on its words, so the war between Sparta and Persia happened. Devers looked at Phoebidas, who was acting a little unnaturally, and said, "A traitor who betrayed the interests of a Greek city-state and repeatedly broke its promise said it represented all of Greece and fought a holy war against Persia. How can I not laugh? Yes, it's ridiculous. How can such a shameless city-state exist? It's a disgrace to Greece." The elders, led by Antonio and Amyntas, deliberately mocked. Phoebidas's face turned red and he roared, "How dare you insult Sparta? Aren't you afraid of the wrath of Sparta?" The laughter did not stop. Amyntas said excitedly, "Wrath? Are you talking about the war? That's great, I'm looking forward to the next victory. Master Devers, let the first platoon take the next battle. The soldiers are bored out of their wits." Even Capys, who usually did not speak much during the meeting, joined in the fun. He was obviously angry at the unreasonable and overbearing people of Sparta. "That's right, the first platoon has been following you, Master Devers, for a long time, but they have never participated in a victory before. The soldiers are unhappy about it," Antonio added. Phoebidas was dumbfounded. His anger had been cleverly turned into a request for battle by the people of Dionia. Chapter 191. The Dionia alliance has no intention of starting a war with any Greek city-state, but if any city-state wants to start a war, humiliate us, or invade our land. Everyone, what is our answer? The Devers looked around and asked loudly. "Fight to the death. Destroy the enemy. Fight to the death." The former mercenary elders shouted in unison. Phoebidas walked out of the meeting hall with a pale face. Dorobysus went up to him and asked anxiously, "How's the situation?" "Go. Get on the ship. Go back," Phoebidas said angrily. Under the escort of the patrol team, Phoebidas and the others hurriedly returned to the passenger ship and sailed towards the sea under the surveillance of the two patrol ships. "Say, if my ship crashes into them." Phoebidas pointed at the patrol ships that sandwiched his ship in the middle and asked angrily, "Will they sink?" Dorobysus was shocked. Before he arrived at the meeting hall, he had a premonition that this mission would fail, but it actually made Phoebidas so angry. What exactly happened in the meeting hall? He did not dare to ask. Phoebidas looked at the city of Turin that was about to disappear from his sight and buried the humiliation he suffered in his heart. He said coldly, "Let's go to Castellan." "Lord Consul, I'm afraid that chasing away the Sparta emissaries will be detrimental to the alliance," Cornelius said worriedly. "I've said it before, chase away those mercenaries. You guys insisted on staying, and now trouble has come," Polixus said with dissatisfaction. In the face of criticism, Capys, Agathia, and the others, who were once comrades of these mercenaries, could not refute. At this moment, Plesinas stood up and said, "Didn't those mercenaries receive the punishment of the alliance's laws? Didn't the other freedmen make mistakes? Why did they have to chase away those mercenaries? Everyone, our union is currently lacking in manpower. It is precisely because of the union's open, free, and equal attitude that we have attracted so many foreigners and freedmen. There is no reason to chase away those who seek refuge with the union. It will only destroy the image of the union and make all the Greeks who wish to seek refuge with us suspicious." "But what if Sparta declares war on us?" Olaphus asked worriedly. "So what? Are you going to agree to Sparta's unreasonable request and let Lord Devers lead our citizens to Asia Minor?" Pleisenslas shouted angrily. Orpheus glanced at Devers guiltily and didn't dare to speak. Sparta might not dare to declare war on us. The Devers smiled confidently. We are not a small city-state, but a powerful force in Greece. If Sparta wants to win, I'm afraid it won't be that easy. But now most of its energy is focused on Asia Minor. The war with Persia is not an easy task, and it won't end so easily. I also heard that not long ago, Sparta had a war with the city-state of Elis, which is responsible for hosting the Olympia Games. It can be seen that even on the Peloponnese Peninsula, there are many city-states that are dissatisfied with Sparta. At this time, if it dares to start another war in Greece, I doubt it. Although Devers said so, in his heart, he already regretted that he didn't think carefully and rashly agreed to Agathia's request. There was never an absolute thing in the world. If Sparta went crazy and insisted on war with the Dionia alliance, although the Devers were not afraid of fighting with Sparta, the expansion plan of the alliance that they had originally planned would be ruined again. The movement of Sparta's warships toward Castellon was beyond the alliance's expectation. The patrol ship immediately reported this discovery to the Senate. After an urgent discussion with the senators, the Devers decided to send a messenger to Castellon immediately to bring the Senate's order. Castellon must refuse to receive the messenger of Sparta. When the messenger rode a fast horse and arrived at the city of Castellon with the convenience of the newly built Turii Castellon Avenue, the chief general of Castellon, Amicles, had already led other generals and some members of the Council of 100 to the port, ready to welcome the messenger of Sparta. After all, the messenger of Sparta, the ruler of the Greek city-states, had arrived. As a small and remote city-state, they naturally did not dare to neglect the arrival of the messenger. When they saw Phoebidas disembarking from the warship, they were about to introduce each other and greet each other. Suddenly, one of Amicles's subordinates rushed over and handed Amicles a papyrus. Amicles's expression changed after reading the papyrus. He immediately said to Phoebidas, "Dear messenger of Sparta, there is an urgent matter that we need to discuss. Please wait for a moment." Then, without waiting for Phoebidas's reply, he led the generals and the counselors away. "Something seems to have happened?" Dorabitius said curiously when he saw them standing in a circle and arguing about something. Phoebidas did not speak. He stared into the distance and felt that something was wrong. Amicles returned to him with a determined look on his face. "Dear messenger of Sparta, I'm sorry to inform you that Castellon, as a member of the Dionia alliance, has just received a strict request from Dionia. They cannot allow you to enter Castellon city, so..." Amicles waved his hand apologetically, and a group of soldiers walked over. "You are humiliating Sparta. Have you thought about the consequences of this?" Phylidas threatened angrily. He had originally planned to sow discord between Castellon and Dionia after entering Castellon city. It would be best if he could make Castellon break away from the Dionia alliance. According to his understanding, Castellon had only joined the Dionia alliance recently. Other than that, he had also planned to stay here for a few days and send soldiers to infiltrate the port of Turii to capture a few mercenaries who had escaped here. He would then be able to report to the Council of Elders and take revenge on the Dionia alliance at the same time. However, it seemed that it was impossible now. Seeing Phoebidas leave angrily, Amicles temporarily heaved a sigh of relief. Then, he became worried again. The Dionia alliance was too bold to provoke the people of Sparta. If they really led their troops to attack, what would Castellon do? Phoebidas was still unwilling to give up. He turned the ship around and sailed towards Tarentum. Tarentum was a powerful state in Greece. Phoebidas did not think that the Dionia alliance could affect it. Moreover, Tarentum was a state of Sparta, and the two sides were on good terms. The establishment of Tarentum was somewhat dramatic. A few hundred years ago, Sparta coveted the fertile land of Messenia to the west of Turigonia, so they started a war. The war lasted for nearly 100 years, and Sparta finally completely annexed Messenia, turning the Messenians into Hercules. However, because the men of Sparta had been away from the war for a long time, the women of Sparta could not bear the loneliness at home. As a result, they had sex with the Piraeaci in Sparta and gave birth to a group of babies. When they grew up, they were not recognized by Sparta. So, after much effort, their leader, Francosus, obtained permission from Sparta to ask for an oracle from Delphi. In the end, the oracle from the Temple of Apollo was confusing: to find a place where rain could fall from a clear sky and build a city. So, Sparta agreed to let Francosus lead the bastards and the exiles away from Sparta to build a colony. Francosus led the group westward in search of a place to settle. Their fleet crossed the Adriatic Sea and went to the Gulf of Taranto. Along the way, they saw many places that did not meet the requirements of the oracle. The long sea voyage made the people who accompanied them complain, and Francosus was also very depressed. He told his wife about his troubles, and she put his head on her lap to comfort him. As a result, his sentimental wife became depressed. When Francosus felt her tears splashing on his forehead, he suddenly realized the true meaning of the oracle, because his wife's name meant clear sky. So, he immediately ordered the people to disembark at the Gulf of Pulia, which later became Tarentum. Here they built a city and named it after Teras, the son of Poseidon. Although the founders of Tarentum had left because they could not obtain citizenship in Sparta, and later, Tarentum had developed into a democratic city-state, but with a double archon, senate, and assembly, similar to Amendola, which was born out of Sparta's double king, council of elders, and assembly, except that it did not have an overseer and was less oligarchic, and was a prosperous commercial city, very different from its mother state, Sparta, which had always clung to its agrarian traditions, but with which it had always maintained good relations. In the War of Peloponnesus, Tarentum stood firmly on the side of Sparta, and when the Athens fleet passed through Magna Graecia on its expedition to Sicily, it refused to allow it to dock or provide food or water. As a result, Athens retaliated by vigorously supporting the Messapians against Tarentum. Tarentum welcomed Phoebidas, of course, but after greeting the leaders of Tarentum, Phoebidas immediately mentioned the insolence of the Dionia alliance and its lack of respect for traditional Greek city-states. He also reminded the senators of Tarentum that the Dionia alliance advocated force and aggression, and was a danger to the Greek city-states. He also suggested that Tarentum should no longer ally with the Dionia alliance, and instead limit its expansion. Chapter 192. Seeing Phoebidas reluctantly board the ship and leave the port of Tarentum, Diomedes immediately changed his expression and said to Eumaeus in a serious tone, "The people of Sparta are right about one thing. If Tarentum doesn't pull itself together, even a new city-state like Dionia, without any historical tradition, will look down on us. Are we really going to war with Messapi?" Eumaeus was a little hesitant. "Haven't the Messapi been waging war against us?" Diomedes asked. He said in a pained tone, "It's precisely because we have been tolerating the Messapi that they have been thinking that Tarentum is weak. That's why they have been harassing us more and more. This has also made the other Greek city-states increasingly ignore the existence of Tarentum. We must fight back and completely solve the problem of Messapi." "Completely solve it? That's not what you said to me last time," Eumaeus said with a frown. Diomedes let slip and quickly said, "What I meant was that first, we should focus all our efforts to capture Manduria, which is the biggest threat to us. Then, we should look for an opportunity to capture Brindisi. This way our strength will be greatly enhanced. The other Messapi city-states can be captured slowly." Eumaeus was a little tempted, but he was still a little hesitant. "Do we have the strength to defeat the main force of Messapi?" "Of course we do," Diomedes said firmly. In order to convince his colleagues, he added, "And we have a strong backup force." "What backup force?" Eumaeus was stunned. Diomedes pointed to the west of the sea. "Dionia is our ally. We have helped them for so long. It's time for them to do something. Eutychus finally said, I will support your proposal in the Senate. Damn it, Dionia, Castellan, Tarentum, these Greek city-states are all on the same side. Phoebidas said angrily from the ship. Why don't we go to Crotone? Dorobysus suggested carefully. Phoebidas glared at him and said, to Syracuse. Phoebidas knew that Crotone and Dionia were on bad terms because of the previous war. However, he could not go because Dionia was not the only enemy of Crotone. Rockley's relationship with Crotone was even worse, and Rockley was an ally of Syracuse, Sparta's ally in Greece. If he went to Crotone, Syracuse would probably complain to Sparta. Though he wanted revenge on Dionia, he did not want to be exiled like Tibronii. Besides, Syracuse was a better partner than Crotone. However, when dealing with the tyrant of Sicily, who was said to be a little overbearing, Phoebidas felt that he should learn from the lesson of being too flamboyant in Greece. He should change to a more obscure method to achieve his goal. The newly built Christoia restaurant in Thurii was located in the southwest of the city near the dock. Compared to the other Christoia restaurant next to the Thurii market, its customers were mainly citizens of the Alliance, foreign ambassadors, and wealthy merchants. Therefore, it served high-end dishes such as beef and mutton hotpot. For this reason, a part of the restaurant was partitioned into a small open-air courtyard so that smoke could be vented during the barbecue. When Timizon, Xanthoparis, and Creano walked into the courtyard, they were not unfamiliar with the scene in front of them. After all, they had enjoyed it in the mansion of the Devers. Creano was interested in the price of the beef and mutton hotpot. As he ate, he asked the servant beside him, "How much does it cost to eat this?" The servant thought for a moment and said, "My honorable guest, it depends on how much you eat. Usually, a person needs about 2 to 5 drachmas." "That's expensive," Creano shouted in surprise. "I can't even earn a drachma a day now. It's a little more expensive than ordinary dishes, but it's worth the price." The servant explained patiently, "First of all, the beef and mutton in our restaurant are purchased from Nudum. The cattle and mutton of Lucaria are famous throughout Greece. Of course, the price is not cheap. Secondly, the restaurant needs to send people to the top of the mountain in the west to collect ice and snow that does not melt to freeze the meat. This is a very risky thing. Then, there are some meat-cutting slaves with good knife skills to continuously cut the meat of uniform thickness for you. The restaurant also hired chefs from Egypt to make all kinds of sauces for you. Finally, there is me to serve you at all times. You see, there are so many complicated processes and so many people to make the beef and mutton hotpot you like. Do you still think it's expensive?" "You have a clever mouth," Creano could not help but exclaim after listening to the servant. Then, he sighed again and said bluntly, "Unfortunately, I'm a slave. Although I'm a slave now, my benevolent master still pays me every day. According to the Slave Act issued by the Alliance, a slave can become a free citizen as long as he works hard for his master for more than 4 years and is able to raise enough money to redeem himself, as well as obtain his master's consent. Our master, Christoia, is as kind as Lord Devers. She has already made a sacred promise to god Hades in front of us. Therefore, I think that in 10 years, I will definitely become a citizen of Dionia." The slave's eyes shone with gratitude and hope. "Devers, you really know how to buy people's hearts. Aren't you afraid that the slave masters will object?" Creano looked at the slightly excited slave, and did not say this out loud. Instead, he asked casually, "What's your name?" "Taenarus." "I hope your wish will come true," Creano said against his will. Taenarus replied happily, "Thank you for your blessing, kind guest." Look, someone finally praised Creano for his kindness. Timison joked. "Timison, are you jealous?" Creano pretended to be angry as he picked up the beer can. "Come, let's drink." "Hey, you want to make me drunk with your alcohol tolerance." Timison did not hold the glass anymore. Instead, he picked up the can. Come, let's finish it. Let's drink. The two raised their heads and gulped down the beer. Xanthoparis shouted, Drink slowly, you two. Agathia spent a lot of money to treat us to dinner. Then, he joked to Agathia, This restaurant belongs to the Devers, right? You should ask him to charge less when you pay the bill. Don't worry about Agathia. He's an elder of the Senate. How can he not have a few dozen drachmas? Criano said loudly, hiccuping. There was a hint of jealousy in his voice. Criano is right. Don't worry about money. Let's eat and drink as much as we want tonight. Agathia said loudly, as if he did not hear the sarcasm in Criano's words. Give me another can of beer. Timison said to Taneris. This wine is good. I like it. I'll have another one too. Clino shouted after him. Please wait. Taneris hurried to the door and called out to the waiter in the hallway. The banquet lasted for about half an hour. Everyone was a little tipsy. A year ago we were fighting the Persians every day, and we saw the stiff corpses of our comrades around us. We didn't even have much hope of making it back to Greece alive, and we never thought we would be drinking and eating so happily today. Xanthoparis said emotionally. It's not easy. We really have to thank the gods for their blessing. Let's drink to the fact that we're still alive. Timison raised his glass. Thank Zeus, Hades, for his blessing. The others replied one after another. Xanthoparis put down his glass and said, Agathia, you didn't just invite us here to eat and drink, did you? He was observant enough to notice that Agathia was a little depressed. Agathia's ladle paused in the air. After a while, he put down the ladle and wiped the wine off his mouth. He looked at the three people who were looking at him and said in a low voice, Today, the messengers of Sparta came. They asked the alliance to capture you and hand you over to Sparta. The news of Sparta's warships arriving at Thurii had already spread in the port. Timison and the others knew about it, but they didn't expect the messengers of Sparta to come for them. What did you say to the Sparta messengers? Criano asked anxiously. The other two also looked nervous. Don't worry. Even though Sparta threatened us with war, the Devers still firmly rejected the messengers of Sparta. Agathia's answer made the three people let out a long sigh of relief. The Devers are indeed leaders who always win battles. They aren't afraid of Sparta at all. Criano praised the Devers again. Actually, the people of Sparta aren't that scary. We followed them to Asia Minor for more than half a year, and we know Sparta quite well. Their generals are indeed very experienced, but the number of Spartan citizens they can send to the battlefield is too little. They mainly rely on the troops of the alliance and mercenaries like us when they go out to fight. Their combat power is actually not that strong. Just dealing with the Persians alone is already difficult for them. I don't think they have the strength to provoke the alliance. Timison also tried to comfort them. Chapter 193. The three of them looked at each other. Xanthoparis quickly comforted him. Agathia, you didn't do anything wrong. We're all grateful that you saved us from the battlefield of death in Asia Minor. As long as we stay in the alliance patiently, I believe we'll eventually get citizenship and land. We're just not used to it yet. As for Sparta, you have to trust me and Timison. They won't do anything hostile to the alliance for at least 3 or 4 years. Greeks like to dilute their wine to prevent them from doing stupid things. However, Agathia didn't drink any beer tonight. He only drank wine without dilution and ended up drunk. Timison and the rest struggled to help him back home. When they came out, the three of them sighed. Christian pouted. He's regretting asking us to come to Greece. Is he not going to help us anymore? Agathia isn't that kind of person. Xanthoparis shook his head. I think he's under too much pressure recently. He wants to relax by drinking. But we should really restrain those who don't listen to us. The two of them argued for a while. When they turned around, they saw Timison walking slowly with his head down. He seemed to be thinking about something. Timison, what are you thinking about? We should go back to the docks. Christian shouted. Timothy looked at the two of them and said slowly with a serious tone, I still remember what Devers used to say. It's better to rely on yourself than on others. When Phoebidas arrived in Syracuse, he was welcomed by Dionysius. He invited Phoebidas and his entourage to his palace and set up a banquet. Watching the alluring dance of the beautiful female slaves at the center of the banquet hall, Phoebidas, who had trained himself to a rather strong self-control in the military since he was young, felt his mouth go dry. He drank several mouthfuls of wine in succession. He heard that Lysander's life in the city-states of Asia Minor was comparable to that of the nobles in the East. It should be like this, Phoebidas thought. Phoebidas, I heard that you went to Dionia. Did you get it done? Dionysius asked casually. Sparta's warship had circled around the Taranto Bay. Someone had already sent the news to Syracuse. Yes, but it didn't work. Phoebidas admitted with a hint of admiration in his tone. The consul of Dionia and the senators of the Senate are very tough. Even in the face of Sparta, they are not willing to give in at all. Dionysius said with slight surprise, It sounds like you have a good impression of them. Although I haven't been in contact with them for a long time, I can feel that they respect war and victory very much. They respect capable generals and warriors, and they train very frequently, just like us in Sparta. Phoebidas was not stingy with his praise, and this new alliance is developing very quickly. I heard that it was only a small city-state half a year ago, but now it has 3 cities and 2 affiliated alliances. I believe it won't be long before it becomes a powerful force that dominates Greece. Dionysius heard this and squeezed out a smile. That's good. At least the natives of Greece have met their match. Although he said that, he put down the wine glass that he had picked up, and the wine splashed on the table. He immediately changed the topic to his upcoming attack on Carthage's army. Phoebidas saw this and a smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. On the way back to Sparta, Dorabitius, who had been holding back for a long time, asked, Phoebidas, why did you praise Dionia during the banquet? Dionysius won't be able to sleep with my praise. Phoebidas smiled proudly. Ever since the previous usurper of Syracuse, Gron, he has treated Syracuse as the leader of the alliance between Sicily and Greece. I remember the old man saying that Gron even sent his army north to Campania in central Apennine to defeat the Etruscans who besieged Cumae. And Dionysius's ambition is even greater. He used force to turn the Greek city-states in southeastern Sicily into Syracuse's vassals. Will he allow a powerful force to emerge in Greece and threaten Syracuse's position? Unfortunately, he's about to attack Carthage and won't be able to take action against Dionia in the short term. Oh, I see. Dorabitius suddenly understood, but he immediately asked, Since Dionysius is interested in Greece, I'm afraid that Dionia is not as important as Lygum and Crotone in his heart. Yes. Phoebidas admitted. Dionia's current strength is not as strong as these traditional Greek powers, but its speed of development will still raise the vigilance of the greedy Sicilian. Dorabitius recalled the magnificent sight he saw when he was invited by Dionysius to inspect his army. He could not help but exclaim, Come to think of it, Dionysius is really impressive. He can actually send an army of 50 to 60,000 men and 2 to 3,000 cavalry to attack Carthage. Although there are many of them, I don't think there are many who are good at fighting. Half of what Phoebidas said was the truth, and the other half was sour grapes. Even Sparta, who had become the overlord of Greece, could not send such a large army at once. One could only imagine the strength of Syracuse and its vassals. Let Syracuse, Carthage, and Dionia kill each other. Phoebidas cursed in his heart. In the new year, 398 BC, the road from Turiae to Castellon was completely built. The thousands of Crotone captives of Dioria had also returned to Crotone due to the half-year deadline. The Devers were getting more and more nervous and excited as Christoia's stomach was moving more and more. It was less than a month before her due date. At this time, news came from Nudum that Potentia officially announced that they would support the son of Acapyrus, Luzo, to recapture the Gramentum, and asked Sinsing to return to Picassus. Otherwise, Potentia would send troops to fight. Sinsing suddenly became nervous. He took the initiative to send messengers to the tribes of Gramentum that occupied the south of the city, saying that he was willing to immediately implement their previous request, as long as they could reunite to deal with the coming army of Potentia. Sinsing's concession made these tribal leaders very happy. They were also afraid that if Luzo really recaptured the Gramentum, he would come after them because they knew that Luzo, like his father, was also a person who would seek revenge for the smallest grievance. Everyone thought that it was external pressure that forced the two forces in Gramentum to compromise and come together again. However, when the tribal leaders came to the center of the city to negotiate with Sinsing, they did not expect Sinsing to ambush a large number of soldiers in advance. They suddenly launched an attack, killing all the participating tribal leaders in one fell swoop, and then launched a surprise attack. The tribes in the south of the city suffered heavy casualties under the premeditated attack of Picassus's warriors because their leaders were killed and they were not prepared. Some of the warriors surrendered, and some escaped from the city of Gramentum. Sinsing unified the Gramentum in one fell swoop in the face of the threat of Potentia's military. Hearing this news, even the Devers had to admire Sinsing's decisiveness and ruthlessness. Little did they know that Sinsing could do this mostly because of the painful memory of being ambushed by the Zegs from behind. Soon, Sesta sent another report to the Senate, saying that due to Sinsing's massacre in the Gramentum, some of the Lucarians had fled to Nudum. Coupled with the impending war between Picassus and Potentia, the small tribes sandwiched between the two major forces were afraid of being involved in the war and had fled south, causing the number of registered citizens in Nudum to skyrocket to 8,000. Nudum did not have enough land to distribute, nor could it support such a large population, so they requested that some of the Lucarians be moved to Turii. The Devers and the Senate discussed repeatedly, especially during this period of time when Nudum was stable and the Lucanians had performed well. They finally reached a consensus. They agreed to move. Phoebidas returned to Sparta. The report of his diplomatic mission to Dionia did not attract the attention of the Elder Council. One of the reasons was that he had always acted on his own, causing the Sparta elders who knew him well to resent his repeated emphasis that the Dionia alliance was disrespectful and unreasonable to Sparta and must be punished. Instead, they concluded that he was the one who stirred up trouble and caused such a result. The more important reason was that the elders did not have the energy to deal with this small matter because one of the two kings of Sparta, Arsus, had passed away. Since the time of Homer, Sparta had been ruled by two kings. The kings, who claimed to be the direct descendants of Hercules, came from two hereditary royal families. One was the Agidi family, which was located in the center of Sparta, and the other was the Eulopontes family, which came from the southern part of Laconia. Arsus was born in the Eulopontides family. Although in this era, due to the rise of democracy, Sparta's royal power had been greatly limited, it still enjoyed many privileges, especially when it died. The entire Sparta territory was preparing for Arsus's funeral. Cavalry ran all over Laconia, announcing the news of Arsus's death. Women banged iron pots and spread the news around the city of Sparta. After receiving the news, every household had to send 2 free men, 1 man and 1 woman, to mourn in mourning. The people of Pythias also had to send a fixed number of people to attend the funeral held by the Elder Council. Chapter 194. According to Sparta law, the throne was inherited by the eldest son. However, if the eldest son was born before the king succeeded to the throne, he would give way to the oldest son born after the king succeeded to the throne. If the king died without an heir, the throne would be inherited by his closest male relative. If the heir was still young, the regent would act on his behalf. The founder of Sparta's current regime, Lycurgus, was the regent. Arches had only one son, Leotychides, who was 23 years old. It was only natural for him to succeed to the throne, but whether Leotychides was Archi's biological son had always been a topic of gossip among the people of Sparta. During the Peloponnesus War, the Athens general Alcibiade defected to Sparta, and King Archias valued him very much. However, he did not expect the handsome and romantic man from Athens to seduce his queen, and even let the whole city of Sparta know about it. The humiliated Archias threatened to tear Alcibiade into pieces, but Alcibiade ran back to Athens when he heard the news in advance. Not long after, Archias' wife became pregnant, so the people of Sparta naturally had doubts about Leotychides becoming king. Archias' younger brother, the 45-year-old Agesilaus, had always performed well. In the eyes of the people, he was a traditional and pure Sparta. Although he was lame, he also had the support of many people. It was conceivable that the issue of succession would be enough for the elders to worry about. Who would have the mood to deal with a trivial matter like Dionia? It was the second time that Corinth's merchant Dios came to Thurii. After a few months, the port had changed a lot. First, the people of Dionia dug inward on the north bank of the estuary of the Crati River, thus expanding the port. 2 long-poured stone breakwaters surrounded the merchant ships that entered the port like the arms of a giant. The dock was no longer as simple as it was the last time he came. Wooden trestles went deep into the coast, and on the shore were neat and orderly stone houses and buildings, as well as flat and wide transport roads. Although there were many merchant ships coming and going from the estuary, the port management personnel still commanded them to dock and unload goods in an orderly manner. The organization was quite orderly and efficient. The porters at the docks were also very efficient in their work. Very few of them were slacking off, playing tricks, or even bullying strangers. From time to time, Dios would see people in white Bolton uniforms strolling back and forth between the docks with pen and paper in their hand. Wherever he passed, these laborers behaved even more diligently. Later, after asking other merchants, he found out that those people were civil servants sent by the registry of Dionia. They were in charge of inspecting the daily labor performance of the freedmen who wanted to become citizens of the Union. If there were any misdeeds, it would be difficult for them to wait for a few years to obtain the status of preparatory citizen. Of course, there were 2 or 3 squads of fully armed soldiers patrolling the port, maintaining order in the port. When Dios walked into the port, he found that the Dionia Union had surrounded the port with a thick and towering city wall, and the market was located outside the city wall. When he came to the market, it was also a noisy area. The original wall of the market had been demolished. Because there were too many shops, the expansion of the market could not keep up with the speed of the addition of shop. Rows of shops and workshops occupied all the open space, leaving only a wide passage for customers to buy and sell, transport goods, and firefighters to fight fires. In addition, there were 2 special buildings that were independent of the market. One was a hospital. Most of the Greeks in northern Greece knew that the doctors of the Dionia Union were skilled in medicine. Some even said that they were much better than the doctors of Crotone. Moreover, the Dionia Union had built a comprehensive hospital that was unprecedented in Greece. It was obviously different from the previous clinic. Whether it was in terms of facilities, system, or management, it was very standardized and strict. For the patients, this was an unprecedented treatment method. The sacred feeling made the patients feel better even before the doctors started the treatment. For the doctors, this place was like a magnet that attracted their attention. It was said that if it were not for the bad relationship between the Dionia Union and Crotone, many doctors of Crotone would want to come here to learn and visit. Naturally, the front of the hospital was overcrowded every day. There were also many people in the other building. When Dios asked, he found out that it was a court specially set up by the Dionia Union for the Thurii market and port to quickly deal with all kinds of trade disputes and conflicts that occurred there every day, and to provide convenience for merchants, customers, and a large number of sailors and laborers. Dios was very interested in this pioneering work that no other Greek city-state had, so he also squeezed into the crowd. The Dionia Union established the position of judge at the beginning of November, mainly because after the influx of a large number of foreigners, the regular administrative affairs were enough for the city governors to work on, and they had to deal with more detailed and cumbersome legal disputes. The governors of the 3 cities were complaining, so the Devers proposed, and after discussion by the Senate, it was decided to establish the position of senior judge. There was no special judge in the Greek city-states. Cases were often judged by generals or consul, but in Athens, there was not even a judge, and the verdict was made by the jury. In Dionia, as the only archon, Divers naturally had the highest judicial authority. However, he was busy with work, and unless it was a major case, ordinary disputes would not require his time to deal with. Hence, this authority was initially delegated to the various city magistrates. He was responsible for supervising the low-level judges that were sent to the various cities and handling appeals. Polixus was one of the names to be elected by the Senate, but when it was submitted to the Devers for review, he did not say anything, but in the end Proxylus won, because of the strong recommendation of the Devers. Originally, Proxylus was supposed to be in charge of the court in Thurii, although it was not yet fully built, and the court next to the market was handled by his subordinates. But the newly established union was like the sun in the morning, and the people were busy with their own affairs. There were almost no complicated or influential cases for him to deal with, so the energetic and idle new judge came to the market, seized the power of his subordinates, and tried the cases himself. "What's the next case?" Proxylus, who had just finished a dispute, asked impatiently. The junior judge, Phrakylion, looked at him with a bitter look. Phrakylion used to be a subordinate of Cunegorata, and he was originally assisting the governor in dealing with legal affairs in the city hall. After the independence of the law, there were not many talents in the union who were proficient in the law. Phrakylion was recommended by Cunegorata and was quickly promoted to a junior judge, which could be counted as entering the ranks of the middle-level officials in the union, who knew that after a few days of happiness, his position was taken by Proxylus, and he did not dare to say anything. After all, Proxylus was not only an elder of the Senate, but also a senior judge. His position was equally prominent, and as soon as it was established, he was promoted by the Devers to a position second only to the city governor, to show the importance the union attached to the law. Moreover, as Phrakylion's immediate superior, Proxylus had the right to report his work performance to the Senate Public Service Management Committee, and the right to recommend him when he wanted to transfer. The wife of a citizen of the union filed a lawsuit against a Lygium merchant for discrimination, said Phrakylion. Discrimination? Proxylus was a little confused. That woman is Lucanian, Phrakylion said in a low voice. Oh. Proxylus nodded. Then bring in the plaintiff and the defendant. The courtroom in the market was not big, and it could only accommodate a judge, a clerk, a programmer, a guard, and other public officials. The plaintiff and the defendant could only stand outside the open-air courtroom, and behind them was an open space surrounded by iron railings. The public could watch from outside the railings at will, so that the people and foreigners could understand the laws of the Union, and achieve the effect of propaganda and education. At the same time, the judge was under the supervision of the people. A man and a woman entered the courtroom, and under the guidance of the programmer, they first chanted the names of the 3 judges under Hades, Minos, Rhadamanthos, and Iku, and swore by their names that what they said was the truth. Then, the plaintiff made her statement. The young Lucanian woman spoke in a strange but fluent Greek. Your Honor, I am the wife of Isam, a citizen of the Union. Today, I came to the market to buy a pottery bottle for olive oil, and when I went to his shop, the woman pointed to the merchant next to her and said, I found that he sold a lot of pottery, and they were all very beautiful, so I decided to buy from him. But because I spent a little more time choosing the pottery, he suddenly got angry at me. he said. "Damn barbarian, are you going to buy it or not? If you can't afford it, don't touch my bottle with your dirty hands, or if you break it, it will not be enough even if I make you my slave." He also said, "Your Honor, she is lying. I have never said such a thing." The merchant shouted loudly. "Shut up first, wait for her to finish before you speak." Proxilus scolded, and then said to the woman, "Continue." He also said. The woman blushed, stared at the merchant, and gritted her teeth. He also said, "A barbarian woman like you does not deserve to use such noble pottery. You might as well be my slave, and make me happy, and when I am happy, I may reward you with a pottery." Note: the third interposition of Alcibiades is described in another of my novels, From City to Empire. Chapter 195. "No, I didn't say that." The merchant hurriedly refuted when he saw the judge's expression change. Suddenly there was a burst of cursing behind him. "How dare you discriminate against us Lucarians? Are you tired of living? Why, Zam is a warrior of our alliance. How dare you insult his wife? Your Honor, please punish this lecher." The merchant groaned inwardly. He had originally thought that the woman was a Lucanian slave who looked rather pretty, and he had wasted too much time just asking for the price. That was why he had said those words in a moment of dizziness. He did not expect that he had provoked the wife of a citizen of the Dionian alliance. In fact, it was because he had only been here for a few days and did not understand the customs here. Most of the wives of the citizens of the other cities stayed at home. If they could go to the market to buy and sell things, and they were foreign women, then they must be female slaves. Taking advantage of the language, even if he touched them a few times, no one would care. However, Dionia was different. Many of its citizens married Lucanian women, and many of the Greek women of Dionia married Lucanian citizens. These foreigners did not have as many complicated etiquette as the Greek. They were bold and open, and naturally, they gradually influenced and changed the conservative atmosphere of the original Greek citizens of Dionia. In addition, the governor Devers, who was revered by the people, also allowed his wife to appear in public. They even opened banks and restaurants in the market, which naturally further promoted the change of customs in Dionia. Now, it was common to see the wife of a citizen of Dionia in the market. "Defendant, is what the plaintiff said the truth?" Proxilus asked. Seeing that the merchant was about to speak, he reminded him loudly, "If it's only discrimination against foreigners, the most you will have to pay is a fine and corporal punishment. But after swearing in front of God, you still lie. This is a crime of blasphemy, and you will have to suffer the cruel punishment of having your tongue pulled out. So you have to think carefully before you speak." The merchant was shocked. After a long silence, cold sweat broke out on his forehead. Finally, he said in a low voice, "What she said is mostly true, but I didn't know that discrimination against foreigners is also against the law." "Really?" Proxilus looked serious. "When you rented the stall, did you not familiarize yourself with the regulations of Dionia? Business must follow written by the Market Management Office." "No." The merchant wanted to deny it, but he suddenly remembered the regulations of the Dionia Market Administration. If one was not familiar with the regulations, one could not rent a shop. So, he could only nod. "Yes. Since that's the case, you're knowingly breaking the law. First of all, if you violate the law of Dionia cannot discriminate against foreigners, you will have to pay a fine of 10 drachmas and 2 strokes of the rod in order to deepen your memory and prevent you from doing it again. As for you using words to profane the plaintiff, but not putting it into action, does our alliance have a bill in this regard?" Plotsilus asked Frachelion. Frachelion thought it over and shook his head. "Looks like I have something to do at the next Senate meeting," Proxilus muttered to himself. He thought for a moment and then said, "As for the punishment for your verbal blasphemy, I leave it to the plaintiff to decide." The merchant trembled and looked at the plaintiff with a pleading gaze. The young Lucanian woman did not refuse and simply said, Then punish him to be a guide in the market management office and do 5 days of voluntary labor. Good, that's it. Proxilus applauded the plaintiff's suggestion. Defendant, you can choose not to accept the 5 days of voluntary labor given by the plaintiff, but you will be expelled from the alliance and will never be allowed to do business here again. Proxilus said in a serious tone, think about it carefully. Are you willing to accept this punishment? As a merchant, dignity was not important. What was important was whether or not he could make money. His pottery business in the Thurii market had been very prosperous these days. Of course, he did not want to be expelled from the alliance because of such a small matter. Of course, he accepted the punishment in the end. The next dispute was quite the opposite. It was a conflict between a registered freeman peddler and a foreign merchant. This free man insulted and beat the merchant. The facts were clear and the evidence was conclusive. There was no dispute. He could be punished according to the market management law of not discriminating against foreign merchants and fighting and causing trouble. However, this free man did not admit to beating the merchant during the trial. He kept hinting to Proxilus that he was the confidant of Polixus and had been working for him. He hoped that the judge would let the matter go. The young and vigorous Proxilus could not stand Polixus, who always showed off his noble birth in the Senate and occasionally looked down on the non-Thurian senators. Now that he had the opportunity, he would not let it go. He shouted angrily, "Bold defendant, how dare you destroy the reputation of Lord Polixus? Not only did you bully the plaintiff, but you also hurt him. You still refuse to admit the truth and violate the oath you made before. I sentence you to be guilty of blasphemy immediately." The free man was shocked and hurriedly begged for mercy, while the onlookers cheered for Proxilus. In the end, the free man refused to accept the torture of pulling out his tongue, and chose to be beaten 40 times with a stick. He was beaten until he was barely breathing and was carried out of the court. At the same time, the scribe recorded what he had done. Even if he eventually recovered, the registry office would use this to expel him from Dionia. What happened in the market and the port were only small disputes and conflict. The process of sentencing was very fast. There was no need for cumbersome legal procedures, lawyers, and juries. Dios watched for a while outside the court and saw something strange. It was clear that this small court was using practical actions to show the citizens, slaves, foreigners, and foreigners that the Union of Dionia was fair and just, and to protect the legitimate rights of all law-abiding people in the territory of Dionia. It was especially touching for merchants like them who traveled far and wide. Merchants like Dios were considered citizens with status in their own city-state. When they did business in other city-states, the local citizens often acted out of jealousy, holding the mentality of, "this foreigner wants to earn the money of the city-state," and often some hostile actions were taken. The higher-ups of the city-states often favored the citizens of the city, because elections needed the support of citizens. Among the Greek city-states, Athens had the best attitude towards foreigners who settled and did business in the city. Because its super-developed trade and handicraft industry required it to be open to the technology, capital, investment, and employment brought by foreigners. It gave foreigners considerable rights in the law. In addition to being unable to own land and hold public office, foreigners could even contract the mines of Athens, monopolize the sea, and so on. Of course, the generosity of Athens was also rewarded by the kindness of the foreigners. Usually, they would make some charitable donations, such as repairing temples, holding theatrical celebrations, and letting the citizens of Athens watch them for free. When Athens was in danger, they also stepped forward like the citizens of Athens, serving as heavy infantry, buying weapons and equipment, and even donating 3-tiered warships to the government of Athens. Now, Dionia had a tendency to follow the example of Athens, and in some ways, they were even bolder than Athens. This time, Dios came because the Senate of the Dionia Union had passed a new bill, which allowed the lease of land between the Saraceno River and the Cisno River to foreign merchants as handicraft land for a period of 20 years. The news immediately caused a sensation among the foreign merchants in the Thurii market and quickly spread throughout Greece. Most of the merchants who had been to Thurii were optimistic about the business and trade prospects of the Dionia Union, not to mention that Dionia had allowed Laos to join its union, so that any merchants who traded in the union could enter Laos at a preferential price and open up trade with Naples, Massilia, Gaul, the Iberian Peninsula, Mauritania, and other regions. Especially in Thurii, the construction of the Laos Avenue had begun. With the quality of the roads built by Dionia, the completed avenue would certainly make the transportation of goods between the two cities more convenient. By then, it was estimated that it would take 2 days to travel from Thurii to Laos, which was almost the same time as using cargo ships to travel by sea. What's more, traveling by sea was more risky, because as long as they encountered pirates or storms, their efforts might be ruined, and they might even lose their lives. At the same time, when crossing the Strait of Messina, the city-states of Messina and Liguim, one to the south and the other to the north, collected high tariffs, which would greatly reduce the profits earned. The land that Dios passed through when he stayed in Amendolara last time was flat, but due to the hard geology, mostly gravel, it could not be used as agricultural land, so it was not distributed to the citizens of the Union. Except for a small part of the land that was built into the Amendolara military camp and used for public militia training, most of the land had been idle. For Dios, such a barren land was also full of value. He wanted to auction off the next piece of land and open a weapons workshop. After making money from the last trade, Dios became interested in this new union. He found that Dionia was an union that advocated military force. Otherwise they would not have held a triumphal ceremony to give the victorious generals and soldiers so much glory. Therefore, there would be no shortage of wars in the future, and the rapidly increasing number of citizens of the Dionia Union had a high demand for weapons. As far as he knew, there was a large weapons shop in the port market of Thurii. It was said that the Union opened it to comfort the families of the soldiers who died in the war and to take care of the disabled soldiers. Most of the weapons and equipment sold were seized, and most of them were for maintenance. There was basically no one who could produce a complete set of heavy infantry equipment from scratch, and they did not have the ability to do so. This gave Dios a chance to make money. Chapter 196. Out of the market, Theos saw rows of stables set up along the road. They were no longer as shabby and dirty as when he first saw them. Theos had a good impression of the old coachman, so he wanted to ride in his carriage. He started shouting, "Sarikos! Sarikos! The old man is rich now, so he doesn't drive himself anymore. Ride in my carriage." Someone shouted, "Don't talk nonsense, or I'll beat you up." Sarikos scolded jokingly. Dios got into his carriage, and told him where he wanted to go. "Oh, you're also going to see the land for rent, right? Quite a lot of people have been there recently," Sarikos said immediately. Theos nodded and smiled. "I heard you've made a fortune?" "Don't listen to them. I've just paid off the loan and interest on the carriage. I've bought another carriage and rented it to a freedman. I believe I'll be able to pay off the loan again soon. Then I'll buy another carriage," Sarikos said confidently. "Congratulations," Theos praised. "I think you'll be a carriage merchant in another year." Sarikos laughed when he heard this. "I remember you're a citizen of Dionia. The Alliance should have given you a share of land. You're out driving carriages to earn money, but what about the land? I heard that the Alliance has an agricultural officer who supervises the citizens' use of land," Theos asked curiously. "I've rented it to a freedman to farm." "There won't be any problems," Sarikos replied. He drove the carriage onto the road from Thurii to Amendola. The carriage sped along the Sabari plain. The road was crisscrossed on both sides, and many houses had been built among the farmlands. Very soon, the villages would be built. Theos thought to himself, New Turii is developing very quickly. It's already beginning to regain its former prosperity, and it's very different from before. It might even surpass the powerful Greece of the past. After the carriage crossed a wooden bridge over the Sabari River, it passed by grape plantations and wineries. This was the famous wine-producing area of Greece. After crossing the Saraceno, they entered the territory of Amendolara. The land for rent was on the side of the road, already divided into lots by stick. It was near the main road, which made it easy to transport, near the river, which made it easy to supply the workshops with water, near the forest, where trees could be felled. Of course, the League of Dionia had strict rules about felling trees. In addition, after building the workshop on the rented land, he could also build a house for himself and his employees to live in. This would give him a place to rest while he was doing business in Dionia. There was a sea in front, a forest at the back, a river at the side, and a main road to facilitate travel. It was also an ideal place to live. It was believed that every foreign businessman who wanted to rent land here had the idea of building a workshop and a residence at the same time. 20 years was enough for them to earn back the money they invested. Of course, the premise was that the Dionia alliance still existed. After Dios had his eyes on a few ideal plots of land, because the so-called auction would be held tomorrow, he wanted to find a hotel to stay in first. At this time, Soria suggested, "Today you came at the right time. The arena in Turii was just built yesterday." In order to celebrate, the Consul Devers announced, "Today and tomorrow, there will be a rugby match between the 4 cities in the arena. If you have time in the afternoon, you can go and watch it. I heard it's very exciting, even more exciting than the Olympia." Rugby match? Dios was curious and confused. "That's a game invented by the Consul Devers. I heard that it was a divine revelation from Pluto," Sorius said mysteriously. It's 2 teams fight for a ball made of cowhide shaped like an olive." Then they score points." "Oh, I don't know. Anyway, people who have seen the game say it's very interesting and very exciting. You'll know when you see it." "Okay, I'll go and have a look." Soria's strong recommendation piqued Dios' interest. "Go earlier in the afternoon because there are a lot of people. I heard that if you go late you won't be able to enter," Sorius kindly reminded. The arena was located in the east of the northern city of Turin. It was very close to the city's pier and far from the main city area. It was built here with the consideration of not affecting the daily life of the Turin people. The city guards, who were usually strict with their checks, were relatively lax today. As long as they were not carrying weapons, they could basically enter after a count. However, those who exceeded the limit were forbidden from entering the city. Because Dios came early, he was lucky enough to enter the city. While waiting in line to enter the city, he also met a Cretan businessman who was in the olive oil business, Dick Boris. He was also here to watch the football game, and he had already watched a game in the morning. He was fascinated by this novel game. In his words, this was the best gift that Pluto had given to the Greek. No other game could compare to it. This piqued Dios' interest even more. When he arrived at the entrance of the arena, there was already a long queue. Although there were many people, they were still orderly under the supervision of teams of soldiers. At this time, Dick Boris asked Dios to reserve a spot. He went to a shop with a beer sign and brought out 2 cans of beer and 2 bags of dried fruit. He gave half to Dios. Dios thanked him profusely and asked, "How much?" Dick Boris said, "It's the goddess of fate's arrangement that I can meet you here and watch a rugby match together. If you pay, it means that you don't like to make friends with us Cretans." Dios had no choice but to accept it. He had a good impression of Dick Boris's forthrightness and liveliness. At the same time, he also noticed that many people ran to buy beer, syrup, and snack. Dick Boris told him, "Because the game is long, we watch the game under the sun, and it's easy to get thirsty and hungry. In addition, there are many spectators in the arena. If you want to pee, you can't find a place, and this," He raised the beer can in his hand and smiled mockingly. If you drink it dry, it can be used as a urinal. The guards at the entrance of the arena released a group of people into the arena, and after a while, another group was released. When it was Dick Boris's turn, it was clear that the arena was not full yet. The guard signaled for them to enter and walk along the passage on his right. There was another passage on the left that they could not enter. It led to the VIP seat. Almost all arenas were designed this way. The Turii arena was not too big, and the stone benches on the side of the ring could only seat about 4,000 people at most. But in fact, there were more than 4,500 people in the arena, and half of them were free people and foreigners. Like other arenas, its sports field was surrounded by a running track, but inside the running track was a flat rectangular sandy land, divided into many areas by dozens of white lines. Dick Boris patiently explained the rules of the game to Dios, and told him why it was called the Four Cities Rugby Match. The four cities are Amendolara, Turii, Niutum, and Laos. According to my friends from Dionia, this game was first used by the Consul Devers as a military training program, starting from the mercenaries who became citizens of Amendolara. Later, when the Turii and Amendolara formed an alliance, they wanted to conduct military training for the Turii citizens and probationary citizens, so they naturally learned this game. Later, they captured Niutum, and the first batch of Lucanian soldiers passed this game to the Lucanians in Niutum. As for Laos, they sent a large number of laborers to build roads, and the Dionia served as supervisors. They taught Laos how to play this game during their breaks to prevent them from slacking off. Perhaps Laos had just started playing and were not familiar with it, so they didn't seem to cooperate well. That's why they played against Turii in the morning, and the Turii won easily. This afternoon, it's Amendolara versus Niutum. I heard that the difference in strength between the two sides is not big, so it's even more interesting. You know so much, Dios said with emotion. I'm interested in it, so I naturally want to understand it, Diopolate said proudly. I've been here for a long time, and I've made friends with several citizens of the Dionia Alliance. One of them is even the captain of their so-called legion. He was the one who told me, "Why isn't there Castellan?" A voice came from the side. Dick Boris turned his head and saw that some people had gathered around them. Maybe it's because they don't have much contact with the citizens of the Alliance, so they don't have the chance to learn. Dick Boris shrugged. But this morning, I saw some people from Castellan watching the game. I believe that after this four-city competition, the next one will probably be a five-city competition. You're right, Cretan. Castellan will definitely participate next year. Someone in the crowd shouted. Yes, we'll make a suggestion to the council when we get back. Another person echoed. Dick Boris winked at Dios and whispered, "See, I'm right." At this time, the brass horn sounded, and the athletes began to enter the stadium. The players were no longer as shabby as they were when they first played football in the military camp. They all wore soft leather hats that covered their entire heads and necks, and thick jackets made of wool and linen. The jackets were dyed red and blue for easy identification. There were also strange symbols embroidered on the backs of the jackets. They were actually Arabic numerals, as Greek numerals were complicated to write, making it difficult to use, for the referees to identify the players. When the players from both sides entered the field, a strong, rhythmic drumming sounded. Chapter 197. Then, the drumming stopped and was replaced by a long and vigorous horn call. The members of the blue team also began to dance enthusiastically in a loose formation. Their movements were strange and unrestrained, and when they were excited, they even screamed, "Ah!" Their screams were filled with a primitive wildness that made people's blood boil. When the horn stopped, the members of the two teams lined up and saluted the audience around them seriously. The cheers in the arena lasted for a long time. Dios was so attracted by this novel and unprecedented opening that he did not hear Dicbolus' voice clearly. "Dios, which team do you want to win?" "Blue team," Dios answered without hesitation. The Wild War dance of the blue team attracted his attention. You actually want the Lucanians to win? Dicbolus was a little surprised. The blue team is Nudum's team? Dios suddenly realized. No wonder the dance was different. Didn't you see the competition information posted at the entrance of the arena? Dicbolus emphasized. I support Amendolara. Many of its citizens are from Crete, including my friends, referring to the soldiers of the 7th Brigade of the 1st Legion. At this time, the members of both teams turned around and faced the VIP seat. Amidst the clamor, Dios saw a person stand up from the VIP seat. That's the only life consul of the Dionia Alliance, Devers. Dicbolus' voice was filled with awe and a little jealousy. It was the same for Dios. He had a strong urge to see this legendary blessed with his own eyes. He saw the Devers wave his right hand down. The rapid and sharp bronze horn sounded continuously, and the competition began. Sir Devers, there are more people watching the competition this afternoon than in the morning. According to the guard at the entrance, many of them are foreign merchants. Marigi said excitedly, Sir, it seems that your plan to use an exciting competition to attract the rich people from the surrounding cities to spend money in Turiae is completely possible. Mercis was also very excited. I just went outside the arena to take a look. Beer, milk, and dried fruits are almost all sold out. Even sunshade hats and linen cushions have been sold out. It's mainly because the rugby competition is too attractive. As the governor of Turiae, Cunigurata was also one of the people in charge of the competition. He followed the instructions of the Devers and participated in the organization, publicity, security, and preparations for the competition. He personally developed the planned rugby competition into the current situation. He was also filled with surprise. Sir Devers, I think the rugby competition can be held regularly in the future, and we can charge fees, just like watching a play. Will the money from selling the tickets go to the national treasury? Mercis asked anxiously. Of course it will go to the national treasury, but we need to pay the players and compensate the injured players to encourage more people to actively participate in the sport. The rest of the money will be used to build more arenas in Amendola, Nudum. Cunigurata, Cornelis Marigi, Alexis, and Mercis, the 5 of you will form a rugby competition committee to discuss how to further promote rugby and attract more foreigners to watch. Make a more detailed and perfect plan and speed up the implementation. In the future, when this sport becomes popular in Greece, we can also hold a rugby competition in Greece and invite the city-states of Greece to send teams to participate. Devers' words encouraged Cunigurata and the others. In this era, there were 4 sports competitions that had great influence in the Greek city-state. The Olympia Games held by the city-state of Elis in the Peloponnesus Peninsula was the oldest and most sacred, mainly dedicated to Zeus. The Temple of Zeus in Olympia was the holy land of the Greeks, one of the 7 ancient wonders. The Isthmian Games held by Corinth was mainly dedicated to Poseidon. The Pyotia Games held by the famous Delphi Temple in the Pyotia region was mainly dedicated to the sun god Apollo, and the Nemean Games held by the Argosians, who boasted that they were the descendants of the noblest kings since ancient times, were also dedicated to Zeus. In addition, there was the Pan-Athens Games held by Athens to commemorate the goddess of war and wisdom, Athens. The Pan-Athens Games held by the city of Athens were also very influential, and not only were there sports competitions, but there were also competitions in music, poetry, and drama. Whenever these celebrations were held locally, famous people from all over Greece would gather there, and the eyes of all Greeks would also be focused there, winning great fame for the host city. If the rugby game developed well and a large-scale Pan-Hellenic rugby game was held to commemorate Pluto Hades, not only could it expand the influence of the Dionia League, but it could also make Cunigurata and the others famous in history and receive the favor of the gods. Devers saw that they were in a trance and breathing rapidly, and vaguely guessed what they were thinking about. His imagination also ran wild in his heart. In the history of his previous life, the gladiatorial games of the Romans were famous in the Mediterranean, and his Dionia League did not need such bloody, cruel, and inhumane barbaric events. It could still entertain the public and inspire the citizens to be martial artists, and it could do better. In addition to rugby, basketball could also be held in the future. Basketball did not seem to work. The requirements for the ball were too high. Could the current craftsmanship do it? Football might work. Let the Leatherman Toricas try to do it when I go back. Score. Touchdown scored. Good job, Tegthenos. Amintas and Matonis, who were focused on the game, shouted excitedly. They clinked glasses with each other in celebration. Go buy me another can of beer, Amintas said to the slave attendant. Master, the beer outside has been sold out. There's no more. There's no more. Amintas immediately turned around and shouted in dissatisfaction, Sir Devers, your beer is delicious, but the production is too low. Devers smiled bitterly. It seemed that it was time to expand the beer workshop again. Thinking of this, he thought of another matter. Everyone, he said loudly, you should all know that my wife recently bought the hot spring swamp north of Turii. Burkos was the first to nod. As the agricultural officer, he had personally handled the sale of the land. At that time, he had even advised Kristoya that the place was infested with mosquitoes. Apart from a few hot springs, it was not suitable for farming or building houses, so she should not waste money to buy it. I plan to build a large hot spring there to attract Greek merchants and Ionia citizens to come and enjoy themselves. Because it involves the draining and filling of the swamp, the storage of the hot springs, the diversion of the Tino River, and the construction of the hot spring. It requires a lot of investment. Is there anyone willing to cooperate with me to invest in this hot spring? Devers sincerely invited the elders. Bath. The Greeks of this era did not have the habit of taking a bath like the people of ancient Rome in his previous life. They lived a simple life and did not like to take a bath. If their bodies were too dirty, they would rub olive oil all over their bodies, scrape them with a special tool, and then rinse them with water. Therefore, many elders were hesitant about this new thing. Marigi, who had enjoyed the luxurious life of Persia, shouted first, Me. I want to invest. Marigi often discussed the development of the alliance's trade with the Devers. Of course, he knew the young consul's talent in business. Not to mention anything else, the Devers had played a huge role in the prosperous business of Kristoya's banks, restaurants, and breweries. Me too. Merce's was also someone who understood the Devers's talent in business. I'll invest some money too. Cunigarata and Cornelis said one after another. As the two governors who often discussed the management of the city with the Devers, they naturally knew the capabilities of the Devers. We're in too. Helos, Matonis, Amintas, Antonios, Alexis, and the other former leaders of the mercenaries had blind faith in the hot spring. Other than Burks and Satanos, and a few other tourist elders who were willing to invest a small amount of money to show their support, the other tourist elders, such as Polixus and Ananilos, clearly expressed that they were not optimistic about the hot spring. Scambras, Strompoli, and the other Amendran elders, who did not believe that the hot springs could make money, supported Divers, whom they viewed as an Amendran, because of the Turi people's disapproval. Vespa did not understand this at all, but he knew that he was at an absolute disadvantage in the Senate, so he could only follow the Devers closely. Originally, the Devers only wanted to raise funds from the elders for business purposes, and at the same time, tie their interests together, and promote harmony in the Senate. In the end, it became a demonstration of the elders' attitude towards him. Dios stared at the field without blinking. The game was indeed very exciting, beyond his imagination. He originally thought that this ball game might be similar to the stone ball throwing game in Sparta, but now it seemed that it was completely incomparable. Dicopolis supported the Amendran team, but he did not know why he hoped that Nudum would win from the bottom of his heart. However, the score was now 3 o'clock and Nudum was behind. Dios was a little anxious, secretly cheering for Nudum. On the field, it was Nudum's blue team's turn to attack. The Amendran red team clearly cooperated well and knew how to use tactics. They cut off the blue team player's passing route and forced him to the sidelines. 2 members of the red team pounced on him. The blue team player with the ball had no space to dodge, so he could only try to pass the ball from his crotch to the back before he was pounced on. The blue team's quarterback was quick, and he quickly rushed forward to receive the ball. 2 members of the red team immediately formed a pincer around him. Chapter 198. It was a long pass that was nearly 40 meters long. The football flew high and fast. The supporters stared at its trajectory and lamented, "This pass will definitely go out of bounds. It's time for the offense and defense to switch positions again." At that moment, a flash of blue on the right sideline flashed past the red team's interception, rushed over, and jumped high. "Oh my God, he jumped really high!" Amidst the exclamations of the audience, he stretched out his long arms and blocked the hurtling rugby ball in midair. When it fell to the ground, he hugged it tightly with both hands, and the touchdown zone was just a few meters in front of him. "Stop him!" the red team members shouted anxiously. Even the audience on the sidelines could hear them. The red team member closest to the blue team member suddenly pounced on him. The blue team member did not dodge. Using the strong inertia from his previous sprint, he leaped with all his might and threw himself out. Together with the red team player who was hugging his legs, he landed heavily in the touchdown zone with the ball still firmly in his hand. A touchdown. Dios, like other Nudum supporters, was stimulated by the blue team's wonderful performance. He could not suppress the excitement in his heart. He suddenly stood up, danced, and cheered loudly. He even took a big gulp of beer. The cold foam washed away his previous irritation, and his whole body felt refreshed. After sitting down, he realized that his palms were sweaty because of his nervousness. This was indeed a game that was more nerve-wracking and exciting than traditional sports. Dick Boris looked at him and said with sudden realization, "So you support Nudum?" Dios explained embarrassedly, "Someone has to support these aliens. That way, the game will be more intense and exciting." Dick Boris nodded and agreed with his opinion. At that moment, a few referees ran to the touchdown zone because the blue team player who had just scored had not stood up. What had happened? Dios's heart began to tighten again. The referees waved to the doctor on the sidelines, and soon a stretcher was brought over. The blue team member shook his head and refused to lie on the stretcher. He held his left arm and struggled to stand up. "Looks like his arm is dislocated," Dick Boris said. The injured player walked off the field and waved to the audience with his right hand to apologize. His wonderful and heroic performance had moved the audience, and they gave him a hero's salute with warm applause and cheers. "Football is really a sport for warriors," Dios exclaimed. At this time, the spectator beside him who had asked the question before also said eagerly, "Tonight, when I go back, I will call upon the citizens of Castellan to learn rugby. The next time there is a competition, our Castellan will also have an exciting performance." While the attention of the citizens of the Dionia Alliance and most of the foreigners was attracted by the football match, in a house in the cheap residential area below the city of Amendolara, Timizan, Criano, and Torikos were gathered and having a secret conversation. "Leaders, I've already contacted all of our brothers. There are around 1,700 people who are willing to follow us," said Torax, who was originally the leader of the mercenaries and was Timoson's confidant. 1,700 people. Criano was a little dissatisfied. "It's still not enough." "It's enough to attack Cremissa," Timizan said calmly and firmly. "I've investigated Cremissa in detail. After the last war, this small city only has around 1,000 citizens who can participate in the war. Defeating them is not a problem at all. The problem is, how are we going to take down Cremissa quickly? That's why we have to prepare the siege equipment carefully. At the same time, we have to keep it a secret. If the Devers find out, not only will they stop us, but they will also alert Cremissa. Criano reminded them. I didn't tell anyone the truth. I just followed what you taught me last time. I told them, you're going to bring them to Syracuse and be hired by Dionysius to attack Carthage. After the war is won, Syracuse will make us citizens, Torax said. As for Xanthoparis and Tormid, we shouldn't tell them that we're leaving. I've tried asking them a few times, and I feel like they're satisfied with their lives here, Criano said with disdain. Xanthoparis and the others would rather work as dockworkers than fight on the battlefield. They've turned from warriors into cowards. When we get Cremissa, they'll regret it. Timizon comforted Criano with a glint in his eyes. What if we take down Cremissa, and Crotone leads his army to attack us? Torax asked worriedly. Isn't that simple? Criano sneered. Once we take down Cremissa, we'll immediately send someone to tell the Devers. Cremissa is willing to join the Dionia alliance. The Devers will definitely help us. Even if he really forgets our friendship, Felicius, Agathia, Hieronymus, the other officers of the expedition army, the current elders of Dionia, the soldiers who once fought together, and the current citizens of Dionia will also speak up for us. The Devers will definitely consider the opinions of so many people. Didn't he say that he was elected by the people? Would he go against the wishes of so many people? Am I right, Timizon? That's right. How did the Devers obtain Amendalara and become the rulers of the Greek city-states? We can also learn from their experience and use their help to obtain Cremissa. We aren't any worse than them. Why are they so high and mighty while we are in such dire straits? Timizon, who had been a man of few words since he arrived at the Dionia alliance, finally spoke his mind. His face was filled with fighting spirit. A few days later, when the Devers received a report from Aristyras and learned that the mercenaries led by Timizon and Criano were up to something, Timizon had already taken the initiative to meet the Devers. You're leaving the alliance? The Devers were slightly shocked when they heard Timizon's request. We're going to Syracuse to help Dionysius attack Carthage. I heard that he promised, after the war is won, we can immediately become citizens of Syracuse and own fertile land, Timizon said seriously. The Devers remained silent. Due to Aristyras, Syracuse had a grudge against him. He knew a lot about Syracuse. Dionysius did indeed make such a promise to the mercenaries. Timizon saw that the Devers were silent, so he continued in a serious tone, Devers, we're grateful for the help and care that you and Agathia have given us. However, we're used to being free, and we can't adapt to the strict laws here. We can't immediately become citizens of the Alliance either, so our brothers have some objections. I think it's better for us and you to leave. The Devers stared at Timizon. Seeing the determination on his face, they nodded slowly. All right, you're going to Sicily. Is there anything I can help you with? Please return the weapons we stored in your armory. Also, can you help us hire a ship to transport us to Syracuse? If you can give us some tents, it'll be convenient for us to camp in the wild before we get hired by Syracuse. Of course, if you can give us some food. The news that Timizon and Criano were leaving the alliance of Dionia with more than 1,700 mercenaries caused quite a stir among the Senate elders. For Cunigurata, Cornelis, Protesilaus, and the other senators who held important positions and had often been tortured by these troublemaking mercenaries in the past few months, it was a great thing. As for Felicius, Agathia, Hieronymus, and the other former elders of the mercenary army, they felt deeply regretful. Although the Devers appeared regretful on the surface, they were much more relaxed on the inside. After all, many people in the alliance knew that Timizon and the others were comrades of the Devers when they were in Persia. Therefore, if they had any serious misdeeds in the alliance, not only would someone in the Senate, as long as it was the Turii elders led by Polixus, complain to him, the people would also complain. In the long run, it would definitely damage the reputation of the Devers. On the day that Timizan left with the mercenaries, the former elders of the mercenary army and many former soldiers of the expeditionary army went to the port to send them off. Faced with Agathia's apology, Timizan gave him a strong hug. Among these comrades, I am most grateful to you because you sincerely wanted to help us. Zeus above, we will repay your kindness. Creano said to Xanthoparis, Tormid, and the others proudly, one day, you will realize that you were wrong not to leave. When that time comes, you will come and beg us. Looking at the cargo ships full of mercenaries leaving the port, Agathia felt a sense of loss. He said to the Devers in frustration, Did I make a mistake? I shouldn't have let them join the alliance in the first place? The Devers patted him on the shoulder and pointed to the side. You didn't do anything wrong. Not every mercenary likes a life of constant fighting. Didn't they choose the alliance with your help? Following the direction he was pointing, Xanthoparis, Tormid, and the other mercenaries were going their separate ways after sending off their comrades, continuing with their day's work. Chapter 199. After listening to the Devers, Agathia looked at the fleet that was leaving. He recalled the complaints that Creano and the others had been complaining about him. He nodded and said, You're right. Half an hour later, the military fleet was already far away from Turin, heading south towards Syracuse. Timicin, who was sitting on the bow ship, gave an order. The soldiers on the ship immediately moved to restrain the captain and the sailors. They said loudly, We won't hurt you. We just want you to change your course. While comforting the frightened captain and sailors, they raised a red flag on the mainmast. The officers who were scattered on the various ships and had received Timicin's secret notice a day ago saw the signal flag flying on the bow ship. They immediately took action and quickly took control of the 40 ship. Go to the beach between Cremissa and Castellan. Timicin ordered the captain. What do you want? Although the captain was panicking, he still shouted bravely. The soldier who was holding him immediately kicked him. Hurry up and do as the leader says. The sailors saw that the captain was humiliated and started to get restless. After 2 of them were stabbed by the mercenaries, they finally retreated. We're all registered freedmen of the Dionia Alliance. Aren't you afraid of incurring the wrath of the Alliance? The captain looked at the injured sailors struggling on the deck and shouted angrily. That was indeed a problem. Timicin had been in the Alliance for more than 2 months. He had some understanding of the laws of Dionia. Even the sailors who were merely registered and had yet to become probationary citizens were treated unfairly in foreign countries. According to the law, the Alliance of Dionia had the obligation to negotiate with the city-state concerned, not to mention the protection of official citizens. If he really killed them, the senators who were once his comrades in the Senate of Dionia would be fine. However, he was afraid that it would infuriate that fellow who only cared about the law and not personal feelings. His wish to use the power of Dionia to protect Cremissa would probably fail. He ordered his men to bandage the wounds of the 2 injured sailors, and said to the captain as politely as possible, I swear in the name of Zeus, I, Timicin, have no intention of invading the Alliance. As long as you send us ashore, you can sail away. The captain doubtfully asked the helmsman to turn the rudder. Tima Song lowered his voice and hurriedly ordered, Find a way to inform our companions on the other ships. Try not to harm anyone. Why did he say he would try his best? This was because this was a team put together at the last minute, and they were mercenaries. They were only willing to listen to Timicin and Creano's commands because they did not want to be restricted by the Alliance. However, Timicin knew that he did not have the ability to control them. Another half an hour later, under the guidance of 2 guides who had been bribed with a large sum of money, the fleet chose to dock at a sparsely populated beach closer to Castellan in order to avoid being discovered by Cremissa's people. While the captain was still worried about whether the bottom of the ship would be damaged, the soldiers pushed and shoved them off the ship. You said you would let us go, the captain shouted at Timicin in panic. I did say that. But not now. To prevent you from rushing back to inform us, you should stay here for a while longer. Timothy said coldly. He ordered the soldiers to drag the ship to the beach and tie up the captain and the sailors. They were thrown into the bushes on the shore. Of course, there would be resistance from the sailors during the process, and there would be casualties. However, Timothy did not have the time to worry about that. He, Criano, and the other officers quickly gathered the mercenaries and took out some wood hidden under the tents given by the Devers and their former comrade. Everyone worked together to build a ladder. Timothy knew that the Devers were cautious. He had asked for tents and food not only to hide some siege weapons, but also to make the Devers lower their guard. After every soldier had brought 2 days' worth of food, he said to the captain who was lying in the bushes, "The supplies on your ship belong to your consul Devers. Don't forget to return them to him when you get back." He ignored the pleas of the sailors and led the mercenaries to the south. It was difficult for a group of 1,700 to hide their tracks on the plains during the day, especially when the sun was shining brightly. Timothy's initial plan was to land at night, but that meant the fleet of more than 40 ships could only roam the sea during the day. If they were too close to the coast, they would easily arouse the suspicions of the patrolling ships of Crotone and Crimean. If they were too far from the coast, it would be difficult for them to determine their direction in the dark, and accidents would easily occur. As such, Timothy and his men prepared to launch a surprise attack and catch Cremissa off guard. The key was to move fast. Even if Cremissa received the news, he would not be able to react quickly. There was a relatively large swamp between Castellan and Cremissa. It was caused by the flooding of the Raculi River and its tributaries. At the beginning of December last year, Timothy had sneaked over and checked the terrain. It was easy to travel along the coast, and to facilitate the trade between Cremissa and Castellan, there was a ferry and pontoon bridge. However, Timothy did not expect that at the end of December, spring would arrive and the snow would melt. In addition to that, there would be a series of torrential rains in January, and the river level would be much higher than usual. The swamp area would be much larger than usual, and this would cause the mercenaries to have a hard time marching. Just as Timothy and the others were trudging through the swamp, farmers and slaves could occasionally be seen driving their livestock, chickens and ducks, to the edge of the swamp to forage for food. When they noticed the mercenaries in the distance, they all ran away in panic. In the end, scattered cavalrymen began to appear in Timothy's field of vision, letting them know that the surprise attack had failed. Timothy immediately summoned Criano, Torikos, and the other officers to the swamp for an emergency meeting. Should they cancel the plan to attack Cremissa? Criano, Torikos, and the others insisted on moving forward. They believed that they had spent a long time and meticulous preparation to get such a good opportunity. If they gave up and returned to Dionia, they would be ridiculed. More importantly, their intentions would be exposed. The Devers would definitely be wary of them, and the tourists would not treat them well. If that happened, they would be forced to leave Greece, and they would never have such a good opportunity again. When Timothy saw that everyone was of the same mind, he immediately revealed his revised plan. They had to speed up and attack before Cremissa's men could finish setting up their defenses. They had to capture Cremissa in the shortest time possible, then defend against any reinforcements from Cremissa. They had to obtain the approval of the Dionia Alliance to join the Dionia Alliance after they obtained Cremissa. With the protection of a powerful force like Dionia, their safety would be guaranteed. The officers had no objections to his new plan, so everyone started to move. "Brothers, hurry up! Hurry up! As long as we get out of here, Cremissa will be like a delicious olive waiting for us to pluck." Timothy loudly encouraged the dispirited mercenaries. Criano, Torikos, and the other officers urged them as well. The battle-hardened soldiers knew that the situation was urgent, and there was no room for hesitation. They cursed the terrible environment as they pushed forward. Finally, the main force left the swamp. At this moment, A cavalryman who had been observing the situation came forward and shouted, "I'm Timison, the patrol captain of Cremissa. Strangers, you are trespassing on Crimean territory at once." His voice stopped abruptly as a javelin pierced his chest, and he fell off his horse, frightening several cavalrymen who were not far away into a gallop. "Damn it, who threw the javelin?" Timison, who was rushing forward, cursed when he saw the scene. He had wanted to deceive Cremissa's men to buy some time for them to attack, but he did not expect these mercenaries, who loved to kill and do things their own way, to ruin his plan. "Since it has already happened, don't blame them anymore. Don't affect our morale," Criano reminded softly. Ever since they reached the shore, Timison had been frustrated by the series of setbacks, but he had to endure it. Criano was right, they had to hurry. He spat and turned to ask the guide, "How far are we from Cremissa?" The guide saw the twisted expression on Timison's face and gulped in fear. He said with a trembling voice, About 10 miles away." Timison looked at the sky and said to the herald, "Tell our men to hurry up and continue to move forward. We will rest when we reach Cremissa." There was no one along the way. The farmers and slaves who were working in the fields had obviously heard the news and fled into the city. Half an hour later, Timison could vaguely see the city of Cremissa in the distance. He immediately asked the troops to stop and advance slowly. Chapter 200. Although the Tua alliance did not punish Cremissa severely in the end, and Cremissa once again returned to its neutral position, the generals and council members of Cremissa did not have it easy. Although Crotone was defeated, their strength did not diminish, and the merchants who had been to Turiae were amazed at the rapid development of the Dionia alliance. One had suffered the humiliation of defeat for the first time in many years, and the other had suffered from the burning of the city. These two forces were bound to go to war again. This was the consensus of the upper echelons of Cremissa, and for Cremissa, which was sandwiched between Crotone and Dionia, it would be a disaster. After Castellan joined the Dionia alliance, Dionia built a road to connect Castellan and gave it preferential trade. In just half a year, Castellan's trade grew rapidly. Although the people of Cremissa were envious, most of them would not make eyes at Dionia. After all, Cremissa was closer to Crotone, and under the influence of Crotone's influence for a long time, whether it was in terms of feelings or interests, the people of Cremissa were more inclined to Crotone. When the Cremissa alliance received an urgent report from the cavalry, countless soldiers were spotted crossing the swamp area in the north. Everyone was shocked, although some of them thought that they should first understand the situation. But the chief general, Antares, stood his ground and insisted on continuing to send scouts to investigate the situation, while sending people to Crotone for help. He shouted, "Everyone, these people are fully armed and coming from the north. Whether they are Dionia's army or not, they have trespassed into our territory without permission. There is no doubt that they have malicious intentions. The Cremissa Empire has yet to recover from its previous defeat, and we have less than 1,000 citizens who can fight. By the time we figure out what's going on, the enemy will have already reached the city walls. By then, it will be too late to ask for help. I would rather ask for help first, even if I have to apologize to the people of Crotone if I make a mistake in the future, than lose the home passed down by our ancestors because of hesitation." Antares's words convinced most of them. Half an hour after they sent the messengers to Crotone, the scouts brought back worrisome news. About 2,000 heavily armed soldiers, mostly heavy infantry, carrying ladders, were rushing towards Cremissa, and they had killed a Cremissa cavalryman who had gone to ask for information. This was an enemy. The members of the Cremissa Council no longer had any doubt. They did not have the time to thank Antares for his foresight. They had already informed the citizens to equip their armor and prepare their shields and spears, and now they issued an emergency mobilization order for war. All those who could fight were ordered to go up the wall. As a small town, Cremissa did not have any special products, and the port trade was not developed. Even so, Antares and the other generals learned the lesson of the former tourists. They rushed to the port and immediately granted citizenship to nearly 500 young and strong freedmen, asking them to participate in the battle. Just as the people of Cremissa were nervously preparing for war, the mercenaries had advanced to about 200 meters north of Cremissa. Timicin and the others could already see the shadows of the guards on top of the wall. "It seems like the people of Cremissa are prepared," Criano said, a little disappointed. The trace of hope in his heart had also disappeared. Timicin's expression did not change. He said in a low voice, "Since the surprise attack plan cannot be used, we will attack by force." He then immediately ordered, "Brothers, rest here for the time being." He, Criano, Torlicos, and the other officers quickly gathered together and urgently discussed how to attack the city of Cremissa. The city walls of Cremissa were only 4 meters tall, and there was only a 3-meter wide moat around the perimeter. There were no antlers, and it seemed like there were no traps either. Such a simple city defense was nothing compared to the cities that they had conquered with Tiburon in Asia Minor. Even if the city walls were filled with civilian soldiers, Timicin and the officers did not think that they could withstand the attack of the mercenaries. According to Timicin's understanding, the people of Cremissa had been in peace for decades. There was no war. Half a year ago, when the army of Crotone was ambushed by the Alliance, the people of Cremissa were completely massacred. Timicin, Criano, and the officers believed that the people of Cremissa had no battle experience and low morale. No matter how many of them there were, it would be useless. After quickly arranging the troops, Timicin went to the front of the formation and said loudly to the mercenaries, "Brothers, I believe that you will never forget the 2 months that you have spent in the alliance of Dionia. You were able to leave there and follow us here because you are not satisfied. We are all mercenaries, but the Devers have everything, and we have nothing." Timicin turned and pointed at the city of Cremissa and shouted angrily, "The opportunity is right in front of us. Take this city and let us become nobles. We will also become masters." The mercenaries used their spears to hit the round shields and shouted angrily, venting the frustration and grievances that they had accumulated over the past 2 months. At the same time, they wanted to win and look forward to a better life in the future. Their roars could be clearly heard from the top of the city walls, causing the expression of the people of Cremissa to change. The general in charge of military affairs, Euripus, was anxious when he saw this. To boost the morale, he shouted, "Citizens, the enemy has the same number of people as us. We have the protection of the city walls and the moat, they can't hurt us. Besides, the reinforcements of Crotone are already on the way." When the people of Cremissa heard that there were reinforcements, they calmed down a little. "Attack!" Timicin saw that the morale was high, and gave the order without hesitation. Thus, the bugle sounded, and Criano led the troops to attack the west side of Cremissa, while Timicin led the troops to attack the north side. The heavy infantry were in front, carrying long ladders in groups of 5 or 6. They advanced slowly in an extremely loose formation, while the light infantry followed far behind. When they were about to enter the shooting range of the arrows of the people of Cremissa, they took off their round shields, raised them diagonally to protect their heads and chests, and lowered their bodies to move forward. Arrows rained down from the city walls, but the mercenaries showed no fear. They calmly came to the side of the moat, and a few of them helped to set up 6-meter-long wooden ladders on the moat. When crossing the moat on the long ladders, the damage caused to the heavy infantry by the arrows was not as great as the damage caused to the mercenaries if they accidentally stepped on the broken wooden ladders and fell into the moat. Euripus looked at the skillful tactical movements and calm performance of the enemies below the city walls, and suddenly became nervous. This was a group of enemies with rich combat experience, and it would not be easy to deal with them. "Quick! Go and prepare more stones, wood, and linseed oil, and send them to the city immediately," he shouted anxiously. When the heavy infantry had basically crossed the moat, they carried the long ladders again, quickly rushed to the foot of the city wall, and put the long ladders on the city wall. There were also some long ladders on the moat, but they were not retracted. They were for the light infantry to cross the moat later. The people of Cremissa hurriedly threw down wood and stones, and poured down cans of linseed oil. As torches were thrown down, flames rose, and the casualties of the mercenaries suddenly increased. Just as Cremissa and the mercenaries were fighting fiercely, the Devers had already received the shocking news that Timicin had not gone to Syracuse, but to Cremissa. After all, there were many ships coming and going on the east coast of Greece. More than 40 empty ships were stranded on the beach, and there would always be curious merchant ships that stopped to investigate, only to find the captain and sailors tied up and thrown in the weeds. After being rescued, they immediately sailed back to the port of Thurii and complained to the patrol about what had happened to them. When the Devers heard the news, he was furious. As Timicin's guarantor, the hijacking of the cargo ship and the death of 15 sailors had already angered him. What angered him even more was that Timicin had led more than 1,000 mercenaries to land on the coast between Castellan and Cremissa. What was he planning to do? He thought for a moment, and he could guess. Cremissa. These audacious mercenaries actually dared to set their sights on the Crimessa, and I even felt sorry for their departure. Damn Timicin, he lied to us all. While the Devers complained about his carelessness, he also thought about the consequences of the mercenaries' actions. Whether they could take down Cremissa or not, it would break the delicate balance between Dionia and Crotone. Perhaps the alliance would have to make early preparations. But when he thought about the Senate meeting, the Devers had a slight headache. Someone would definitely take the opportunity to make things difficult for him at the meeting. Although it would not affect him in any real way, it was a mistake he had made. As expected, those in power could not be easily swayed by personal feelings. If he had not agreed to Agathia's request, there would not have been so many things that followed. This was a deep lesson that he had to remember. Aristolochus, immediately send someone to invite Felicius, Agathia, Hieronymus, Capus, Antonios. They are all here. The Devers ordered Aristolochus. He needed to communicate with the former mercenaries first. Leader, our men are about to attack. His subordinate shouted excitedly. Timicin perked up and peeked his head out from under the round shield. He saw that a soldier had stepped onto the battlements not far away. At this moment, 7 or 8 spears pierced towards him. The soldier hurriedly used the round shield to block them, but he lost his balance and was pushed down the wall. However, the wall was only 4 meters high, and there were corpses on the ground, so falling down would not cause too much damage. The soldier stood up shakily. He was not fully awake and forgot to defend himself. A stone hit him on the head. As Corinth's helmet was cumbersome and had a narrow field of vision, it was not suitable for attacking a city. He fell down again, but he could not get up again. Timicin saw this and shouted, "Let Exarchias and the rest approach the wall and give the heavy infantry more support." Chapter 201. We are besieging the city, do you know that? Besieging the city. Timicin shouted angrily. The heavy infantry can't go up and take down the city. What's the use of them saving their lives? Go! Go! Timicin watched as the orderly crossed the moat and ran towards the light infantry. He then turned his gaze to the ground below the city. There were corpses lying everywhere, as well as struggling and wailing soldiers. There were mercenaries and Cremissa's men. Timicin had seen such a scene too many times. Before he came to Greece, he had just been under Tiburone's command and had been besieging Larissa in Asia Minor for a few months. He knew how difficult it was to besiege a city. However, he had no other choice but to attack. Time was the key to success for him. Be careful, leader. His men's shouts made him subconsciously hide his head under the round shield. There was a clang and the back of his hand shook. An arrow hit the surface of the shield and bounced up. He had just exhaled when he heard, "Ah!" A cry of alarm was heard, followed by a loud boom. He did not need to look to know that the siege ladder had been pushed down by the enemy. He began to feel irritated. "General, the enemy's light infantry is approaching." The citizen soldiers' panicked shouts made Euripides's heart skip a beat. The light infantry that was originally in front of the moat had quickly moved to the bottom of the city wall. Compared to the poor archery of the Cremissa militia, the enemy's arrows were accurate and ruthless. Soon, most of the casualties of the militia were caused by them. Ignore the enemy on the long ladder. Focus on the light infantry. He ordered his archers as he ran along the walkway. The enemy is coming again. The panicked shouts of the soldiers made him stop. Not far away, a mercenary had already stood on the battlement. Facing a spear, he used his shield to protect his upper body and struggled to jump forward. Not only did the spear not hit him, but it was pinned under his body. He did not get up immediately. Instead, he quickly swung the saber in his right hand and slashed randomly. Several citizen soldiers nearby were slashed in their unprotected thighs. They screamed and fell to the ground. He stood up, but did not take advantage of the chaos to attack. Instead, he retreated to the entrance of the long ladder, squatted down with his back against the battlements, and used the round shield to protect himself. The spears of the soldiers did not do much damage to him. Instead, they were afraid that his saber would come out from under his shield and cut their feet. During this delay, another mercenary came up the battlements. "Press forward! Block them!" Euripides arrived with the reserve team, and a dense barrage of spears forced the enemy into a corner. "Break their shields!" As soon as Euripides' voice fell, the soldier next to him let out a shrill scream as a javelin pierced his ribs. The light infantry at the foot of the city did their best to support their comrades who were attacking the city. Arrows and javelins were concentrated on this section of the city wall. The heavy infantry also increased the speed at which they climbed the city. Euripides urgently mobilized all the remaining troops to block this place. After a fierce fight between the two sides, the mercenaries were driven away, but this section of the walkway was full of the wounded and dead Cremissa militia. In the face of such a group of obviously experienced and bloodthirsty enemies, every time they broke in, they would cause a lot of damage to the defending soldiers. Euripides felt a little powerless, and his manpower began to run out. "Quickly go and inform General Antares that the enemy has invested all their strength in the north of the city. This place can't hold on any longer. Let him send reinforcements." Antares had no troops to send. However, since the enemy had been attacking the north and west, the troops responsible for the defense of the east had been idle at this critical moment. Antares immediately made a decision. Send someone to inform General Predes to immediately lead the troops stationed in the east of the city to reinforce Euripides. "Leader Timicin! Leader Timicin!" The messenger dodged the arrows as he hurriedly ran towards Timicin. "The enemy on the east wall has left. I have already seen it." Timicin's tone revealed a bit of excitement. "Go and tell Torikos to act immediately." "Yes." Seeing the messenger leave, Timicin immediately raised his arms and shouted, "Brothers, work harder! Attack with me! The enemy can't hold on any longer." After saying that, he held his round shield and strode to the long ladder. He grabbed the wooden ladder with his right hand, and the soldier guarding the ladder held his buttocks and pushed him up. He took advantage of the momentum and jumped up a few steps. The soldiers in front of him had already entered the city wall. Using both his hands and feet, he quickly reached the top of the long ladder. He quickly pulled out his saber, stepped on the battlements, and used the shield to protect his chest. He ignored the spears and swords that were stabbing at him. He struggled to jump forward, using the momentum to knock away the enemy, and at the same time, he slashed forward with the saber in his hand. "Back to back! Back to back!" he shouted as he slashed. The mercenaries who had been hiding in the corner immediately came closer. Encouraged by Timicin's example, the mercenaries once again launched a fierce attack. They broke through many parts of the northern wall, and if it weren't for Prides leading his troops to support them, the defending troops of Euripides would not have been able to hold on. The two sides fought fiercely on the walkway. Seeing that the large influx of reinforcements had boosted the morale of the Cremissa people, they were ready to drive the mercenaries out of the city again. At this time, there was a huge commotion in the east. The enemy is coming up! The enemy is coming up! The public militia shouted in panic. Euripides hurriedly turned his head to the east and saw many enemy light shield soldiers with leather shields and reverse-blade swords pouncing on him along the walkway on the east wall. Euripides had no time to think about how these people had climbed up the wall. He hurriedly asked Prides to lead the reinforcements back to intercept them, but the two sides were engaged in a fierce battle on the walkway, and it was difficult to divert troops. However, the attack of the Thracian light shield soldiers of the mercenaries was quite fierce. They broke into the crowd, and in the narrow space, the long-handled reverse-blade swords exerted a terrifying killing power. If the sharp blade hooked the hands and feet, the muscles and bones would be severed. If the blade hooked the neck, the blood vessels would be severed. The Crimean citizen soldiers fell in an instant, and they were so frightened that they retreated in panic. The light shield soldiers were like maggots attached to bones, and the nearby mercenaries also took advantage of the chaos to climb up the wall. The easternmost end of the defense line of the entire northern wall of Cremissa had been breached, and the experienced mercenaries were driving the defeated Crimean citizen soldiers to the west in the crowded walkway. The panicked Cremissa people pushed each other in order to escape, and some people fell directly from the inside of the wall. Seeing this tragic scene, Euripides and Prides panicked. They were afraid that they would suffer the same misfortune, so they hurriedly retreated from the city tower. This allowed the mercenaries to easily reach the top of the city wall and occupy the walkway near the city gate, blocking countless Cremissa people on the walkway. The mercenaries mercilessly launched a massacre, forcing more Cremissa people to jump down from the wall. Antares, who was originally organizing and coordinating the defense under the city, saw this tragic scene and listened to the continuous screams of the citizens, and his heart ached. But at this critical moment, he still had to endure the grief and arrange for the withdrawn public militia and people to retreat to the south of the city for the final defense. The mercenaries occupied the northern city, opened the city gate, and the soldiers outside the city poured in. "Leader, we won. We have occupied this city." One of his men supported Timicin and shouted joyfully. Timicin's thigh was stabbed, and there was a knife wound on his right arm. If the enemy did not self-destruct, he would probably have died under the spears. At this moment, he was also very excited. "It should be said that we also have a city," he said proudly. The mercenaries were able to take down the city thanks to the success of his plan. In the Dionia alliance, under his intentional questioning, his former comrades told him the details of the capture of Amendalara, so he knew about the special siege equipment, the rope hook, and got its sketch. He sent people to the blacksmith shop in Heraclea to make dozens of them. During the siege, he deliberately attacked the west and north side. Once the Cremissa people who were defending the east side were forced to come to support, the south side was the Umbria River. He let Taurikos lead dozens of trained light shield soldiers to sneak under the east wall with the rope hook. Even if they were discovered, they would not attract the enemy's attention as they did not carry the siege ladders. Just like that, the light shield soldiers used the rope hook to climb up the city wall and dealt a fatal blow to the Cremissa people. After Timicin left the city, he met up with Creano, who had taken down the west gate, and ordered the mercenaries to continue chasing after the defeated soldiers. Everything went smoothly at first, but gradually, the mercenaries broke free of control. They began to break into houses, loot, and even capture women. Timicin was furious. It was not that he objected to looting, but the battle was not over yet. It was said that the remaining forces of the Cremissa people were hiding in the citadel. They had to take down the citadel in one go and completely occupy it before they could celebrate their victory. However, The excited mercenaries acted according to their instincts and refused to obey his orders. Timothy felt the same way as the Devers. He knew that it was useless, but he still cursed and vented his anger. "Leader, they're all in the citadel anyway and can't run away. Let's lock down the citadel and wait for the soldiers to calm down. Then, we can gather them again and take down the citadel," Torikos comforted. "I'm not worried about the Cremissa people, I'm worried about Crotone," Timothy said anxiously. Chapter 202. So, we don't have to worry about Crotone. What we should be worried about is whether Dionia will accept us occupying Cremissa and become their ally. That was Creano's main concern. "I don't know." Timothy thought about it, but he was not sure. "If it's another city-state, I'm afraid they won't accept this. After all, they're all Greeks, and they're wary of foreign mercenaries like us. However, Dionia is different. The Devers obtained their current position through this method. If we want to succeed, we have to take the risk. If we want to be safe, it's better to stay in Dionia's alliance." At that moment, Timothy was cheering himself up. Creano, on the other hand, was worried about success. "I hope Agathia can convince the Devers. If Crotone really sends reinforcements, we can pretend to be Dionia's army tomorrow to buy some time." Timothy clenched his teeth. He had already deceived Dionia once, so he did not care if it was a second time. He pointed at the chaotic street and said anxiously, "No matter what decision Dionia makes, whether Crotone sends reinforcements or not, we have to do what we have to do first. We have to take over the city as soon as possible, lock up the citizens of Cremissa, send scouts to the south, and have our brothers prepare for defense. We have to end this as soon as possible, or else we'll be worried. Forcibly giving orders to stop looting and killing, or we'll be punished according to military law." Creano smiled bitterly. "That's what the Devers do. They did it in Persia. We can't learn it. Also, more than 200 of our brothers died during the siege, and many were injured as well. We have to let them vent their anger. Timothy, don't provoke them. We have to take it slow. To be honest, in Persia, we laughed at the Devers' actions, calling them fools. But today I know we're the fools. I can't help but admire the Devers. They always think about things in the long term. Once we settle down, we must properly enforce military discipline." Timothy sighed and made up his mind. He immediately sent out messengers to look for the officers of the various teams and had them do their best to gather the troop. Meanwhile, he and Creano rushed to the Cremissa citadel with their personal guards and sent people to the citadel to announce their surrender. The Crimeans' answer was, "Never." Thus, the two sides confronted each other until the afternoon. Seeing that more and more enemies were surrounding the city and that they were preparing their siege weapons, the eyes of Cremissa's people became more and more desperate. They realized that the enemy's attack was imminent, and many of them began to cry. Their expressions were solemn and stirring. They were prepared to live and die with the citadel. At this moment, there was a commotion in the relatively quiet enemy camp. "Crotone's army is approaching the north gate? How is that possible?" Cristiano felt as if he had been struck by lightning. He was so shocked that he didn't want to believe the news was true. Torikos was both anxious and confused. "Our scouts are in the south. We didn't find any traces of Crotone's people in the south. Leader, it's true. Crotone's people are forming up outside the citadel. They're going to attack the citadel soon." Timothy, who was in charge of defending the north gate, shouted anxiously. Timothy managed to maintain his composure. How could he not believe the words of his trusted aide? He thought for a moment and his expression changed. "Oh no. We've been careless. They might have come by boat just like us." How many are there?" Cristiano asked anxiously. He hoped that the guard leader would give him a casual number. "I'm afraid there are 4,000 to 5,000 of them." The guard leader's words shattered everyone's hope. Everyone focused their attention on Timothy. At this critical moment, Timothy asked in return, "Brothers, should we retreat?" "Aye." Cristiano looked at the citadel in front of him. He struggled for a moment before shouting unwillingly, "We're not Cremissa's people. We can stop them with the citadel. As long as we hold on until tomorrow. As long as we hold on until tomorrow. Timothy, you said that if we want to become Cremissa's master, we have to take the risk. Take the risk with our lives. Even if I die, I don't want to return to the Dionia Alliance and be a laughing stock." "Me too, it's just death, there's nothing to be afraid of. We can stop the Crotone with the citadel." Torikos had a ferocious expression. He voiced out the thoughts of most of the officers and soldiers. "That's right, we'll fight to the death against Crotone." The others agreed. Timothy no longer hesitated. He stared at the soldiers and gave the order firmly, "Cristiano, Torikos, gather the soldiers scattered in the citadel, and bring them to the citadel." "Yes." "Paxax, take 200 men and guard the citadel. If Cremissa's people dare to come out, kill them all." "Leader, leave it to me, don't worry. The rest of you, follow me to the north gate. Let the Crotone have a taste of our strength. We won't let them take our citadel." Timothy clenched his fists and roared. Roar. The mercenaries roared, trying to regain their morale. Timothy was an excellent commander. Even though the surprise attack had failed prematurely, he was still able to command his troops calmly. He skillfully mobilized the enemy and broke through the Crimisa city in the shortest time possible. However, as a low-ranking soldier, his eyes were blinded by jealousy and competitiveness. He only saw a weak neutral city like Crimisa in Great Greece. He lacked the qualities of a politician to consider the relationship between the various cities in Great Greece, especially the attitude of Crotone toward their neighbor, Crimisa. Before the rise of Dionia, Crotone did not pay much attention to Crimisa. One reason was because of the agreement with Athens, and the other was that Thurii was not a threat to Crotone. However, after they lost to the Dionia alliance, the situation changed drastically. Dionia took Nudum, Laos joined the Dionia alliance, Dionia opened up the land trade route between the east and west coasts, and so on. Dionia quickly became powerful and prosperous, causing Crotone to feel uneasy. They began to feel the threat of this new power in the north. As a buffer, Cremissa's strategic position became extremely important. Therefore, in the past 6 months, Crotone had been trying to win over Crimissa. This was the reason why Crimissa first thought of asking Crotone for help when he heard that the enemy was attacking. At the same time, when Crotone heard that Crimissa was attacked by the enemy from the north, their first reaction was, "The Dionia has finally begun their attack." Therefore, Crotone's council passed the proposal to send reinforcements almost immediately. At the same time, considering the possibility that the enemy was Dionia, since the messenger who requested for help said that there were only 2,000 enemies, they cautiously sent out 10,000 militia. Just when Timothy thought that the Crotone's reinforcements were all in the north, he sent almost all of his forces to defend the north as well as the east and west coast. Unexpectedly, another fleet entered the mouth of the Umbria River, broke into the almost empty port, and forcefully landed. 5,000 Crotone soldiers quickly occupied the south gate and easily defeated the 200 soldiers of Pasac. After joining up with the Crimeans in the Acropolis, they continued to attack the north. Not only were the mercenaries outnumbered, but they were also in danger of being attacked from both the north and the south. Defeat was inevitable. After receiving the news that a large number of Crotone soldiers broke into the Acropolis from the south, the mercenaries lost their will to fight. Timothy and Criano were also helpless. When the Crotone attacked from the south, the mercenaries only put up a little resistance before they scattered and fled. Timothy saw the fleeing mercenaries being slaughtered like cattle by the Crotone, just like what they did to Crimissa. The wrath of the goddess of vengeance fell on the mercenaries so quickly, and he was filled with despair. "Timothy, let's go," Let's fight our way to the north. Criano shouted anxiously. Timison shook his head. He looked to the north and smiled. Devers, I've lost this battle. Without hesitation, he pulled out his saber and slit his neck. Criano did not have time to grieve. He led a few people out of the Acropolis with ropes, trying to escape during the chaos. However, Cremissa hated them for killing and looting in the Acropolis, so they chased after them relentlessly. The Crotone wanted to do a good deed to the end, so they also chased after them. The mercenaries were surrounded, so other than a few who managed to escape, most of them were either killed or captured. Criano, Torikos, and the others finally surrendered, but they were beheaded by the furious Cremissa. After interrogating the surrendered soldiers, Crotone and Cremissa found out that these ferocious enemies were mercenaries from Asia Minor and Ionia. They had once fought alongside the consul and Devers of Dionia in Persia, and had lived in Dionia for more than 2 months. The attack on Cremissa was a premeditated and independent operation by these mercenaries. Although it seemed like it had nothing to do with Dionia, the generals and council members of Crotone thought that they had found the best excuse. Unless Crotone was willing to maintain a long-term peace with Dionia, Dionia's rapid development would undoubtedly pose a great threat to Crotone. They could only launch a war while Dionia was still growing and destroy this new alliance. Chapter 203. Crotone mobilized their troops to reinforce Cremissa, and the spies that Aristyras placed at Crotone's docks had already heard about it. The next morning, when the messenger of the mercenary army arrived at the Devers mansion, the Devers had already received the news from Aristyras that Crotone's reinforcements were coming. He immediately knew that Timosin's mercenary army was doomed. Therefore, when the messenger of the mercenary army, Piccoles, asked the Devers, "Mr. Devers, the mercenary army led by leader Timosin has already taken over Cremissa. We hope to join the Dionia alliance and get reinforcements from Dionia immediately." The Devers told Piccoles, who was once a translator in the Menon army camp and later became his subordinate, but he chose to leave the Byzantine Empire. "Piccoles, you are late. I just received the news. Yesterday afternoon, almost 10,000 troops of Crotone set off from the docks. They should be able to reach Cremissa in the afternoon. I don't think Timosin can defend Cremissa." 10,000 troops. Piccoles was stunned when he heard this news. "I have already sent people to investigate. I believe that we will know the exact situation of Cremissa by noon," the Devers continued. Maybe Timosin and the others are still holding on." Pickles came back to his senses and begged, "Boss. Leader Dives, for the sake of the fact that we fought side by side, I beg you to send an army to Cremissa and save them. Otherwise, it will be too late if you go after receiving the news." The word leader from Piccoles made the Devers a little emotional, but he still shook his head and said, "Sigh. I can't send troops immediately even if I want to. This requires the approval of most members of the Senate, and they won't agree without accurate information. If the people of Cremissa retake the city, and the Dionia alliance enters the territory of Cremissa, it will be a violation of the agreement, and it will mean war. The war with Crotone." The Devers' patient explanation was obviously not heard by the impatient Pickles. He yelled almost crazily, "We're going to save our brothers anyway, so we'll definitely have to fight Crotone. What are you afraid of? You're the only life consul of Dionia, you have the final say here. Send the troops, I beg you, Chief Devers. The lives of Timosin, Criano, and the rest of the mercenaries are awaiting your rescue." Devers shook his head, feeling that it was impossible to explain things to him. "Go and rest first. When there is news, I will inform you." With that, he signaled the servant to take him away. Piccoles pushed him away and shouted, "Devers, if it wasn't for the help of Timosin and his brothers, you would have died in Persia. But look at how you treat your former comrade. When we came here, not only did we not provide any help, but we were also wronged. Now that Timosin and his brothers' lives are in danger, and they asked you for help, you didn't even help them. You even found an excuse, saying that we need the approval of the Senate. Pickles scolded the Devers for being ungrateful. Devers was furious when he heard that. He thought, you said you're going to Syracuse, but you're actually going to attack Cremissa. When did you talk to me about it? You just wanted to use me and Agathia to make Dionia take the blame for you, but you never thought about how you would put Dionia and yourself in a passive position. Now that you've failed, you're begging me, but you don't even have the slightest apology. Who's the ungrateful one? Do you really think I'm that easy to talk to? With his current identity, there was no need for him to argue with a simple-minded mercenary. He simply ordered the guards to chase Pickles out of the mansion. There was a lot of noise in the living room. With the help of Asuna, Kristoya came down from the second floor with her big belly. She asked with concern, I heard arguing downstairs. What's wrong? Nothing. Devers squeezed out a smile and scolded her softly, You're about to give birth. Instead of resting, you're still walking around. Kristoya tactfully stopped asking. She covered her bulging belly and said, The baby kept kicking me just now. It woke me up. Baby, be good and let your mother rest. Devers placed his face on Kristoya's belly and said softly, Oh, he kicked me again. Kristoya said in surprise. Madam, he's so naughty. It must be a boy. Asuna said with a smile. Naughty little guy. Devers patted his belly and said softly, Kristoya, I'll accompany you for a walk in the courtyard. At that moment, he and Kristoya both had a blissful smile on their faces. After Pickles was chased out of the Devers' residence, he immediately regretted it. The Devers' door was tightly shut. No matter how hard he tried, he couldn't open it. He had no choice but to look for Felicius and the others. However, Felicius, Capus, and Antonios either avoided him or apologized to Pickles when they saw him, saying that they couldn't help him. In the end, it was Agathia who told him, because the mercenaries have been causing trouble in the Alliance recently, Lord Devers and them have been under a lot of pressure in the Senate. Especially this time, Timicin and the others attacked Cremissa without Dionia's knowledge. This caused Polixus and a few other Turii senators to directly criticize Devers during the meeting, saying that he was using the alliance of Dionia to seek personal benefits for the mercenaries. This is the first time Lord Devers has faced such severe criticism and humiliation since he became an Archon. Under such circumstances, it's impossible for the Devers to use their troops on their own. Pickles listened without fully understanding, but he also realized that they were oversimplifying things. At noon, Cremissa's news came back. The mercenaries were completely wiped out. Devers sat alone in silence. After a long time, he let out a soft sigh. This matter seemed to have come to an end, but Devers realized that it was far from over. Sure enough, in the afternoon, a passenger ship from Crotone sailed into the port of Turii. 2 people alighted from the ship, the general of Crotone, Lucius, and the chief general of Cremissa, Antares. What did this mean? The faces of the senators in charge of welcoming them changed slightly. 2 corpses were also carried off the ship, Timicin and Creano. This made Felicius, Agathia, and the other mercenary senators sad. Therefore, today's Senate meeting began with an unusually tense and solemn atmosphere. The chief general of Cremissa, Antares, was the first to speak. He tearfully accused the mercenaries of all the evil deeds they had committed in Cremissa yesterday and the suffering the people of Cremissa had suffered. Then he burst into tears. Why have the people of Cremissa been living peacefully for decades, but recently they have been plundered by wars? Could it be that we accidentally offended Ares, causing him to vent his anger on the people of the Crimean continent? Lucius looked around the hall and noticed that some of the Dionysian elders looked unnatural. Meanwhile, Archon Divers, who was sitting in the front row, was listening attentively, occasionally nodding his head as though he was in the same situation. He sneered in his heart, stood up, walked to the center of the hall, hugged Antares, and then faced the senators of Dionia and said, Honorable Consul and the Lords of the Senate of the Dionia Alliance, as an emissary of Crotone, I would like to say that yesterday, Crotone sent reinforcements in time to save Cremissa from being destroyed by a group of bandits. During the interrogation of the prisoners after the war, we learned that these bandits were mercenaries from Asia Minor. They had fought together with Lord Devers and some of the senators in Persia for more than a year. They were invited to come to Greece and registered in the alliance, preparing to become citizens of Dionia. Is this true? That's right, the Devers nodded and admitted without hesitation. Lucius did not expect him to answer so straightforwardly. He was slightly taken aback, then he raised his voice and said loudly, according to the statements of the prisoners, they were instructed by the Dionia Alliance to raid Cremissa, preparing to turn Cremissa into an ally of Dionia. Nonsense. Bullsh *t. This is a false accusation. Amintas, Dracos, Agathia, and the others stood up and cursed. Whether you admit it or not, the truth is the truth. The bodies of the two bandit leaders are still on the dock, and some of you even shed tears just now. Lucius pointed to the front, his expression solemn as he shouted, People of Dionia, you have broken the truce agreement with Crotone, and you still want to deny it? Antares glared and pointed at the Devers and cursed, Ever since you foreigners came to Greece, there has not been a day of peace in Greece. No, it was not Cremissa who angered Ares, it was you who expanded and invaded everywhere, bringing war to the various city-states of Greece. The grievances of thousands of people who died in Cremissa must be redressed, and Dionia must be punished. There was an uproar in the hall. The Devers stood up and walked in front of Antares. He sneered and said, I originally wanted to express Dionia's apology to Cremissa and even offer some compensation, even though Dionia had nothing to do with this matter. Antares opened his mouth to refute, but the Devers looked at him and roared, You shut up! He was startled. Chapter 204. Tell us, Crotone. Let's hear how big the Crotone's appetite is to take advantage of Dionia. Amintas, Scambras, and the other elders began to shout. The guilt they felt earlier had now turned into a sense of solidarity. Lucius glanced at Devers. This young man should not be underestimated. He cleared his throat and said loudly with a normal expression, The Crotone Alliance and Cremissa request that Dionia compensate Cremissa with 500 talent to compensate Cremissa for the huge losses suffered in this battle. What? 500 talent? You've gone crazy thinking about money, Merces shouted. Lucius ignored him. He looked around at the crowd and continued, Secondly, in order to prevent the aggressive Dionia from invading the neighboring states again, we request that Dionia disband the alliance and allow Amendolara and Nudum to be independent. Abolish the alliance. What? Did I hear it wrong? What right does Crotone have to tell us what to do? We will never agree to it. This is a humiliation to Dionia. Get out. How dare you come to the Senate of Dionia and say such things? Are you crazy? Only an idiot would agree to such a request. Only an idiot would make such a request. The hall was in an uproar. The elders were cursing and swearing. The hot-tempered ones like Amintas and Scambras even wanted to beat Lucius up. However, they were stopped by Cunigarata, Cornelis, and the others. It was a mess. Lucius and Antares looked on coldly as if they were outsiders. It was as if the chaos was not caused by them. That was until Devers stepped forward and said, Did you hear that? This is our answer. He said loudly, enunciating each word, No, answer, yes. That means war, because you were the ones who violated the agreement first, Lucius said with a straight face. Then let's go to war. Isn't that why you came here? The Devers had already seen through their plan and were too lazy to argue with them. If you want to incriminate someone, you can always find a pretext. Lucius did not see the expected reaction from his nonchalant attitude. It was as if he had punched empty air. He subconsciously said again, War. I'm talking about the war between Crotone and Dionia. Devers smiled and turned around. Are we afraid of starting a war with Crotone? Great. I can finally fight again. I can't wait to beat up Crotone. We defeated Crotone once, so we can defeat it again. This time, we will burn down Ciudad Crotone. Unexpectedly, Lucius felt a little uneasy when he faced the elders who were filled with fighting spirit. Cunagurata, please take note of Clotho's request. It will be useful in the next negotiation, Dave suddenly said. The next negotiation? Lucius was confused. Yes, after the war. Lucius' heart skipped a beat. He saw the burning fighting spirit in the Devers' eyes. After sending off the emissary, the atmosphere in the hall was still lively. Compared to the former mercenary elders who were filled with fighting spirit, the elders of Amendolara and Turiai expressed more concern about the impending war. Cunagurata's words were very representative. Sir Consul, are we confident in fighting Crotone? Crotone has been a strong nation in Greece for decades. It even has a powerful alliance. It can organize an army of 30 to 40,000 men. And it has 25 three-oared warships. We don't even have a single warship. Once the war starts, Crotone can easily blockade our port. This time, I'm afraid it won't make the same mistake as last time. Devers listened carefully and looked around at the people in front of him. He could feel their fear of Crotone, especially the Turiai. It was the prestige that Crotone had accumulated in their hearts after destroying their cities 3 times. He thought for a moment and was about to reply when a voice suddenly interrupted. I've already said that we should chase away those damned mercenaries, but you didn't listen. Now we're facing Crotone's revenge. We should first hold some people responsible for allowing them to do as they please. The one who spoke was Polixus. Agathia and the others glared at him. Did I say something wrong? Polixus stared back, unwilling to be outdone. Now that the war has broken out, there's no point in arguing about this. We should all unite and overcome this crisis together. We can't create differences and weaken our strength. Buckos persuaded his friend. It's precisely because of this that the war started. That's why we need to investigate this issue to prevent similar things from happening in the future. Polixus stubbornly retorted. At this moment, Antonio stood up and said, as a censor, many people have recently reported to me that when the city of Turiai was being rebuilt, Buckos, Plazinas, and the other elders often went to the homes of the people to express their apologies. However, some people, as the main assistants of Neonsis, were responsible for the burning of Turiai, yet they swaggered in and out of the Senate every day without showing the slightest hint of remorse towards the people of Turiai. They asked us to conduct a thorough investigation to prevent similar things from happening again. Polixus' expression changed drastically. Devers asked, Polixus, do you think we should investigate this issue? Polixus trembled slightly under the sharp gaze of Devers. Antonio's, just like what Buckos said, we should unite to deal with this war of life and death. Let's put everything else aside for now. Devers' calm voice entered Polixus' ears. As if he had been granted amnesty, he suddenly relaxed and slumped on the stone bench. Antonio's glanced at Polixus with disdain, then turned around and said, Very well, Your Excellency. Devers said with a relaxed expression, My apologies for the interruption just now. What I wanted to say is that all of you have been busy with your own affairs recently, so I'm afraid you don't know much about the military strength of the Alliance now. Scambras, do you think the number of soldiers in the Alliance is still around 5,000? Scambras, the stubborn old man, stroked his beard and chuckled. It's definitely more than that. Right now, just the citizens of Amendola alone, I'm talking about more than 6,000, including the probationary citizens. I'm not too sure about the rest, but it's definitely a lot. As for the specific number of citizen soldiers, I'll let military officer Felicius tell us. After Devers finished speaking, Felicius stood up and said, All of you, I'm going to announce the number of people who have participated in the military training in Turin, Amendola, and Nudum. This number is lower than the total number of people in the census of Lord Raphael. This is because the citizens over the age of 45, as well as some special professions that are under the protection of the city-state, such as doctors, engineers, and scholars, are not included in the military training system of the citizen soldiers. The senators nodded and turned their attention to Felicius. There are around 5,500 citizens of Amendola who have participated in military training for more than 3 months, around 4,300 from Nudum, and 14,800 from Turin. Seeing the surprised expressions on the faces of the senators, Felicius continued to explain in detail. Among them, there are 7,000 official citizens, and the rest are all probationary citizens. At the end of December last year, Lord Consul ordered me to carry out a preliminary reorganization of them, forming a total of 3 legions. The first legion is mainly composed of veterans and probationary citizens of Amendola, and it's the strongest force. The legion commander is Capus. The second legion is mainly composed of Turin citizens and probationary citizens, and its legion commander is Drax. The Legio III is mainly composed of citizens and probationary citizens of Nudum, and its legion commander is Hieronymus, and the first captain is Bagul. The number of regular soldiers in each legion is currently 7,000, and the 3 legions have a total of 21,000 soldiers. In addition, there are 3,600 reserve soldiers, and a total of about 24,600 soldiers. In addition, there are 300 cavalry led by leads. Felicius didn't mention registered free citizens. In fact, we can also organize 10 to 20,000 trained free citizens to fight as light infantry. In addition, Laos can provide us with 2,000 to 3,000 reinforcements, and Castellan can't provide many troops, but at least 50 cavalry. The Devers looked at the crowd and said in an impassioned voice, "If we go all out, we can at least get close to 50,000 troops. Considering that the ports of Nudum and Turin need to be guarded, the actual number of troops dispatched will definitely be far less than this number, but it's already about the same as Crotone's troops. My lords, please rest assured, since the establishment of the alliance, there will not be a situation where we are outnumbered. We have the ability to compete with Crotone on land." The Devers's words excited the senators, and Amintas and the rest even more confidently shouted, "In the past we were not afraid of Crotone, and now Crotone is even less of a match for us." Chapter 205. Cunigarata's solemn expression relaxed a lot. He thought for a moment and said, "I'm afraid our war with the Crotone can't be resolved in 2 or 3 days. In that case, we should focus on how to solve the problem of supplying food to tens of thousands of soldiers." Marigi immediately said, "I'll rush to the market now and suspend all wheat transactions. I'll immediately purchase all flour and other food from the market to prevent the merchants from maliciously speculating on the news of the war and causing the price of food to rise. I also suggest that we go to Heraclea immediately to purchase food as a reserve." The Devers nodded in agreement. Although Mursa's had a long face, he still cooperated and brought Marigi to the treasury to collect the money. At this time, Buckos stood up and said, "It's now the season for wheat planting. Most of the citizens are participating in the war, which will seriously affect the harvest of this year's agriculture. I suggest that we stop mining and organize the thousands of city-state slaves to farm the citizens' land. At the same time, we give some benefits to the free citizens of the Alliance so that they can take the initiative to help us. That way we won't lack labor in the fields." "Buckos, you're very thoughtful," the Devers said solemnly. "Cornelis, Cunigarata, and Nudum is quite far away, and under normal circumstances, Sesta is in the city and can't attend every Senate meeting." His gaze shifted to the back of the meeting room. "Vespa Hemont. Hemont has been to the Grimentum many times and successfully signed a peace agreement with Sinsing. He has also persuaded the small Lucaria tribe to submit to the alliance. His influence among the Lucanians is stronger than Vespa's. Finally, Bagul suggested to the Devers, and the Devers suggested to the Senate. The senators voted and approved, making him the third Lucaria senator. The Devers suggested to discuss with Buccos and come up with a feasible plan as soon as possible to ensure that there won't be any problems with our food farming and grazing due to the war. Okay, the few of them replied. Felicius, immediately issue a war mobilization order to all the cities in the alliance. Also, send someone to inform Laos and Castellan to send reinforcements. Oh, and tell Castellan to strengthen the city's defenses and burn the pontoon bridge over the Triantu River. Felicius was stunned for a moment. He wanted to say that there was no bridge over the Triantu River and that they could walk on foot, but out of trust and obedience to the Devers, he immediately bowed and said, "I'll send someone to do it right away." Pleasantness. The Devers said apologetically, "We had no choice but to suspend the construction of the temple and invest all the income of the treasury into this war." "I understand, I agree," Plesinus replied. The Devers nodded in relief. Looking around at the elders, he clenched his fist and raised his right arm. "My lords," he said loudly, "Crotone had destroyed cities on the Zubari plain thrice. After we defeated it, it must be very jealous of Dionia. Why? It's because it's afraid that Dionia will seek revenge after it grows stronger. It will do everything it can to strangle Dionia while it's still growing. So, this war is not something we can avoid even if we want to. The war is upon us, we must unite and defeat Crotone once again. We must avenge the humiliation of Burning City and open up a wider world for the future of the Dionia alliance. War. War. If we can defeat Crotone once, we can defeat it a second time." Capus, Antonios, Amintas, and the other mercenary elders raised their arms and shouted, "Fight Crotone to the death!" Scombras, Proxilus, and the other Amendolara elders responded enthusiastically. "Turii must not be destroyed again. We must fight Crotone with all our might." Berks, Ansitanos, and some other Turii elders also expressed their support angrily. "We Lucanians are also citizens of the alliance. We will defend the Dionia alliance with all our might." Vespa and Hemont, the two Lucanian elders, naturally supported the Devers' decision. Amidst the excitement of the declaration of war, the two officials, Cunigarata and Cornelis, who were initially hesitant, also decisively declared that they would lead the officials and citizens of the cities under their jurisdiction to prepare for the war. Dong. While Marigi was leading his men to the market to buy food, the bell that was originally cast for the Temple of Hades was temporarily placed in front of the Grand Assembly Hall because the temple was not completed yet. It rang for the first time today. The cavalry then galloped toward Amendolara, Nudum, Laos and Castellan. When the citizens heard the bell ringing throughout the city, most of them were still a little confused. At this time, the patrols ran through the streets and alleys of the city, shouting continuously, "Citizens, attention please! Citizens, attention please! War has broken out! War has broken out! Citizens who have participated in military training, please gather at the square immediately! Gather at the square immediately!" On the vast Sabari plain, the cavalry also shouted the same words in every newly built village. War had suddenly come, and it was natural for the citizens to be confused and panicked. However, the strict military training over the past 6 months had taught the citizens and prospective citizens discipline and obedience. They put down their chores and stopped working. After praying to the statues of the gods in their homes, they hugged their families and said goodbye. They brought all their weapons and rations and gathered at the Victory Square of Turii from all directions. Such an obvious move in the city of Turii certainly fell into Tratus' eyes. He wrote in a secret letter, "Turii has issued a war mobilization order. They are rushing to buy food in the market. There is a riot at the port, but it is under control. The situation in other cities is temporarily unknown. Tratus sent the secret letter, and on his way back from the port, he saw the freemen rushing to their shabby shacks with worried faces. A trace of apology rose in his heart. After staying here for more than half a year, he gradually fell in love with this lively city. He had ridden in a galloping carriage, eaten delicious boiled beef and mutton, watched exciting and intense football games. He admitted that life in Thurii was more interesting and humane than in Crotone. If he was not a citizen of Crotone, he would also be willing to live here for a few years and strive to become a citizen of Dionia. Unfortunately, the passenger ship that Lucius took left the Corradi River. He did not directly return to Crotone along the coastline. He first went to Castellan. At this time, Castellan did not know that a war had broken out between Dionia and Crotone. Out of courtesy, they received Lucius. When Lucius told them the news of the war between Crotone and Dionia, the general of Castellan and the senior members of the council were stunned. Lucius threatened them, "The 40,000 troops gathered by Crotone are about to arrive. This is the largest army that Greece has ever seen. Castellan can only be safe if it leaves the Dionia alliance and joins Crotone. Otherwise, it will only be destroyed." The Council of Castellan had a heated debate. Although they were indeed afraid of Crotone's attack, ever since they joined the Dionia alliance, it had brought them too many benefits. Transportation was convenient, trade was convenient, the income of the people and the treasury was much more abundant, and the status of the city had also been improved. So far, Dionia had never discriminated against Castellan. According to the covenant, they had never asked for a single cent of tribute, nor did they ask them to do anything against their will. On the contrary, they were invited to any important celebrations. The people of Castellan's opinion of Dionia grew day by day. They seemed to have found the happiness and stability they had under the protection of Sybaris 100 years ago. In the end, Castellan reluctantly rejected Lucius's request. The chief general, Amicles, said tactfully, "According to the covenant of the Dionia alliance, we have no right to sign any treaties or agreements with other cities, so I'm sorry." Lucius had no choice but to leave the port. At this time, the cavalry of Dionia had arrived and told the Council of Castellan that the alliance was gathering troops. Soon, as many as 20,000 troops would arrive to help defend Castellan. Amicles and the others were completely relieved. They began to strengthen the walls, gather food, burn the pontoon bridge, and seal the port according to Dionia's instructions. Lucius saw the billowing smoke on the Trionta River, which made him understand Castellan's determination. At the same time, he was also surprised by the strength of Dionia's influence. He was even more determined to agree with Crotone's decision to attack Dionia. The passenger ship he was on quickly went south and passed by Cremissa. The Crotone fleet, which had been waiting there for a long time, heard the news of the outbreak of war from Lucius. They immediately raised their sails and sailed towards the Dionia alliance. At this time, under the reminder of Cunigurata, the Devers sent Plazinas to Tarentum to ask the alliance, which had 43 oared warships, to provide assistance to Dionia at sea and stop the Crotone fleet from blockading the port of Thurii. However, the Senate of Tarentum, under the strong opposition of Cunigurata, after a heated discussion, they apologetically told Plazinas that Dionia's request came too late. After the new year, the Messapi invaded the territory of Tarentum again, and Dionia led the army to repel them. The Senate believed that it was necessary to teach Messapi a painful lesson and beat down their arrogance. So, Dionia was once again ordered to lead the army south to attack Messapi's fortress, Manduria. The warships of Tarentum had also rushed to the Adriatic Sea to harass the hinterland of Messapi and interfere with their reinforcements to Manduria, so they could not provide help to Dionia. However, Tarentum could provide food aid to Dionia at a fair price. They only needed to go to Heraclea to buy it. Note: due to the reader's doubts, Here is an explanation of the population of Greater Greece. According to several sources, the number of Turii soldiers who attacked Lucania in history was 10,000 to 15,000. The fact that the Turii dared to let such a large number of soldiers stay away from the city showed that there were many citizen soldiers in the city. Therefore, the author of one source guessed that the population of Turii at that time was at least more than 200,000 people, all the people, not just citizens. Other sources showed that when Tarentum was at its most prosperous period, its population was about 300,000. It was a large city in Greater Greece that was no weaker than Athens. Tarentum entered its final glory during the period when Archita was the consul, which was about 10 years after the novel was written. Therefore, the population of Tarentum at this time was probably no less than 250,000 people. Then, Crotone, which was comparable to it, had a large area, and its population was probably no less than this number. Locri and Lygum were smaller in area, and their population was certainly less than the above city-states. However, they were influential city-states in Greater Greece, and their population was probably no less than 100,000. The population of these major Greater Greek city-states added up to more than 1 million. If other Greater Greek city-states such as Trine, which was located on the Euphemia plain, and Metapontum, which was famous for its agriculture, were included, the population of Greater Greece was probably more than 1.5 million people. Chapter 206. Indeed, when Plesinas entered the port of Tarentum, he did not see the few Tarentum warships that usually patrolled the coastal waters. Nevertheless, he continued to brazenly request to the Senate of Tarentum, even if only a few warships were to be sent to Turii, it would be fine. He had a small calculation in his mind. Crotone would never dare to provoke Tarentum while they were at war with Dionia, so even if only a few Tarentum warships were to patrol the east coast of Dionia as a facade, it could serve as a deterrent, thus ensuring the basic safety of Dionia's coastline. However, no matter how much Plesinas persuaded, the Senate of Tarentum firmly refused, leaving the thick-skinned Plesinas in vain. As soon as Plesinas returned to the port of Turii, Crotone's fleet arrived. The sea trade routes of Turii were immediately cut off, and the port was in a state of panic. Olivers arrived with a large number of patrols to help Marigi maintain order. After learning of Tarentum's decision, Devers pondered for a while, then said to Aristocrates, the clerk next to him, "I seem to remember that the Sparta emissary had been to Tarentum before?" Yes, Aristocrates reported at the time that Sparta hoped that Tarentum would abolish its alliance with us and take the lead against us, but the Senate of Tarentum refused. But it still worked, Devers sighed then sneered, Tarentum wants to sit on the mountain and watch the tigers fight. Well, we have to rely on ourselves in this war. Go and tell Aristocrates that it's time to close the net on the Crotone spy. Yes. The port of Dionia was closed. As expected by Tratus, he had already discussed with the Crotone clippers in advance, every night at a specific beach at the mouth of the Crati River to obtain his information. Just as he began to write the secret letter again, the door was suddenly knocked open, and 4 or 5 people rushed in. In a panic, he subconsciously grabbed the scroll in his hand and shouted, "Who are you?" But he was pressed to the ground by the people who rushed in. His clenched hand was also pried open, and the unshredded scroll was taken away. His expression suddenly changed. This afternoon, about 10,000 fully armed Turii soldiers have entered the barracks, and 1,000 heavy infantry are also stationed at the port. It is said that Amendola's militia is already on the way to Turii Nudum. A clear voice sounded above his head. Tratus, I have to admit that your observation and calculation skills are really good. The information you wrote to Crotone matches the fact. No wonder the Crotone sent you to Turii and stayed here for half a year. What you think your impression here? Hearing this, Tratus' heart sank. He already knew that his whereabouts were already in the grasp of the Dionia. When he was lifted up, he saw an elegant, thin, and tall middle-aged man standing in front of him, looking at him with interest. "What do you want to do to me?" Traitus asked in a low voice, his throat dry. The thin, tall man did not speak. He took an object from someone else and brought it to Traitus. It was a small, crudely carved wooden knife. Traitus' eyes suddenly widened, and his expression was shocked. He struggled and shouted, "What did you do to my child? You caught my child, didn't you? He's only 7 years old. Hera above, I beg you to spare him. Spare him. I'll do anything." He begged bitterly, and in the end, he was sobbing uncontrollably. The thin, tall man said coldly, "Your wife and child are still in Ciudad Crotone, but they are under the surveillance of our people. Let me introduce myself. I'm Aristyras, the intelligence officer of the Consul Devers. Although the Devers promised him this position, he is still a free man and not an official. I'll give you a choice: work for Dionia. If you refuse, not only will you die, but your sick wife will also die of illness due to lack of money, and your son will become a slave. If you agree, you will become a probationary citizen of Dionia. We will try our best to rescue your wife and child, and let the doctors of the Alliance treat your wife. You know that the medical skills of the Alliance are better than those of Crotone." Aristyras paused. Seeing Traitus' head lowered, his expression uncertain, he said in a low voice, "Live or die, it's your choice." At dusk, the chief general of Crotone, Myron, received a secret report from Turii. This afternoon, Turii began to gather citizen soldiers. It was reported that about 4,000 citizens in the city had gathered in Victory Square. The villages outside the city were still in the process of mobilizing, and a large number of citizens had not yet entered the city of Turii. Turii had sent about 1,000 soldiers to the port and sent many cavalry to patrol the coast. Armendalara and Nudum had not yet seen the arrival of the army. In the past 6 months, Crotone had learned from Traitus and the released soldiers. Chief General Myron had some understanding of Dioria and was very vigilant against Dionia. Therefore, he had made preparations in advance. After helping Cremissa eliminate the mercenaries, he immediately mobilized for war. This time, in order to completely defeat Dionia, Crotone and its subsidiary, Asplustum, had gathered all the forces they could, 20,000 from Crotone and 3,000 from Asplustum. Silatina, the ally of Crotone, was a large city, but it had suffered the heaviest losses in the previous raid by the Dionia alliance. However, for revenge, it still managed to squeeze out 2,000 soldiers. Trine, which was close to the Briti alliance, also sent 1,000 soldiers. This time, Crotone did not refuse. Only Carunia was rejected by Crotone, because to the south of Carunia was the Rocari alliance, Crotone's enemy. Although it had not made many movements in recent years, Crotone knew that Rocari had been eyeing the north covetously. If Rocari suddenly attacked and captured Carunia while they were fighting with Dionia, then they could easily take down Silatina, which lacked soldiers and generals, and directly attack the defenseless Crotone. Therefore, they could not relax their vigilance and defense against Rocari. At the same time, the battle with Dionia had to start as soon as possible. They could not wait for the Dionia army to arrive before attacking. Therefore, contrary to the usual procrastination of the Greek city-states, Crotone was particularly efficient this time. Not only did they complete the assembly within a day, but the reinforcements of their allies also sped up under his urging. In fact, when Rocari learned that a war had broken out between Crotone and Dionia, it was extremely happy. After a discussion, its council sent messengers to Dionia. However, not only did Crotone block the road to the north, but Crotone's warships were always cruising along the east coast of Greece from Cape Aulice to the north. This forced Rocari's messengers to change their course. They planned to let the passenger ships turn to Sicily in the southwest, then turn to Tarentum in the northeast to disembark, and take a big detour by land. Devers was analyzing the military intelligence of Crotone with the generals of the Legion and discussing countermeasures to deal with the enemy. Aristocrati came in and whispered a few words in his ear. Devers nodded and said, "Let them in." He turned to the generals and said, "Brothers, Xantiparis and Tormid are here." The hall that was still in a heated discussion suddenly fell silent. Xantiparis and Tormid hurried in with worried expressions. They did not expect to see so many people in the hall and were stunned. At this time, Devers said with a smile, "I was about to call you two, but I didn't expect you two to come first. We are about to start discussing how to deal with the Crotone. Come in quickly and tell us your opinions." Xantiparis and Tormid looked at each other, then knelt on one knee and said apologetically, "Lord Devers and comrades, we are really sorry. We brought war to Dionia and trouble to you all. Timison and Criano have been in frequent contact with the mercenaries and have repeatedly asked for our opinions. We always thought that they only wanted to leave this place, but we, Timison and the others, have nothing to do with you." Devers interrupted them and said with a serious expression, "Everyone has their own ideas and the life they like to live. You and the other mercenaries chose to stay instead of leaving, which means that you agree with the system of Dionia and like to live here. You are willing to become citizens of Dionia. Then come, fight with us. Before the army of Crotone, it is time to test you. Use your heroic performance to fight back against the doubts of others and prove to the people of Dionia that we did not misjudge you. At the same time, prove your determination to defend Dionia to the death. Let the people of Dionia welcome you with open arms." Devers is right. Xantiparis, Tormid, let us fight together and defeat the Crotone. Avenge Timison and the others. That's great. We can finally fight together again. Amintas, Antonios, and the others warmly welcomed Xantiparis and Tormid, making them feel relieved. Note: when the Crotone gathered their army to attack the alliance of Dionia, the 4th volume of this book was coming to an end. He wanted to know if Dionia could survive the fierce attack of the Crotone army. Could they turn the tables and win? Please read the next volume, Southern Hegemon. Chapter 207. The next morning, the reinforcements from the Silatorians and Trine arrived, and Crotone also received intelligence from Turii. About 4,000 reinforcements from Amendolara had arrived in Turii, and the citizens of Dionia from the Zubari plain had gradually gathered in the square. It was reported that there were about 8,000 people, and they then stationed themselves in the barracks in the north of Turii. There were no further movements, and it seemed that Dionia was still waiting for reinforcements from Nudum and Laos. This news prompted Myron to take immediate action. Under his active push, the council passed a resolution to attack Turii. The chief general, Myron, would be the commander of the army, and another talented general, Philadelphus, would be the adjutant. They would lead about 27,000 soldiers, including 20,000 heavy infantry and 6,500 light infantry. Of these 6,500 light infantry, 4,000 were light armored soldiers wearing leather armor and wielding leather shields and spears. They did not have the ability to throw projectiles, and there were 800 cavalrymen. In addition to the regular army, there were also a large number of slaves and freedmen transporting supplies, making the actual number of troops as high as 40,000. For this reason, Crotone organized a large fleet at the port, and it took nearly 3 hours just to load the supplies and get the soldiers on board. It was not until noon that the troop transport fleet sailed north under the protection of Crotone's fleet. When they passed Cremissa, another 500 soldiers joined them, making the number of troops as high as 27,500. Because the whole process of boarding at the port of Crotone was cumbersome and rather chaotic, Myron was worried that the situation would be worse when they landed on the beach. He and Philadelphus were quite concerned about the information from Tratus that the coastline of Dionia is monitored by cavalrymen. To be on the safe side, they did not dare to land on the coast north of Castellan. Instead, after passing the swamp, they immediately docked at the beach where the Timazon mercenaries had landed a few days ago. Myron first let the cavalrymen disembark and expanded the area of security to a radius of 2 miles. After confirming that there was no enemy, they began to land on a large scale. Countless soldiers carried weapons and equipment, some even led war horses, jumped off the cargo ship and walked to the shore. Because there were no docks, the slaves and freedmen had to carry food, tents, and other supplies to the shore. As far as the eye could see, the whole beach was full of people, and it was a mess. People were shouting and horses neighing, and the officers were very anxious. The supplies were randomly placed here and there, which affected the soldiers' formation. Philadelphus beat and scolded the slaves. It took him a long time to organize the whole army and put everything in order. After such a torment, the men and horses were exhausted, and it was already dusk. After confirming the nearby campsite, Myron gave a strict order. Each team had to build a sturdy camp and set up sentries. There was no room for negligence. The defeat of Melantius was a lesson to be learned. This time, Crotone had the absolute advantage and had the initiative. As long as they pushed forward steadily, victory was just around the corner. Tomorrow, we'll capture Castellan and turn it into a forward operating base for Crotone's army and fleet. Myron thought about the next military operation in his mind and gradually fell asleep. In the big tent of the tourist camp, Devers, Military Affairs Officer Felicius, 1st Legion Commander Capus, 2nd Legion Commander Drax, and Cavalry Captain Leds were analyzing the enemy's situation. On the wooden table in the center, there was a 2-meter square smooth wooden board. On it was a detailed map of Greece. Felicius held a wooden stick and pointed at the map on the board. He said, "Everyone, I just received information from the front. Crotone has sent about 30,000 soldiers. They've landed here, on the coast south of Castellan. It's estimated that they'll be able to attack Castellan tomorrow. 30,000 people." Cavalry Captain Leds sucked in a breath of cold air. "Crotone has probably sent all the citizens of the city to deal with us." "What's 30,000 people?" Drax shouted, unconvinced. "If the 3rd Legion can arrive in time, together with those freedmen, we'll have more than 30,000 people. And even without 30,000 people, Crotone is no match for us." "But Crotone's soldiers are all citizen soldiers." Capus looked at Devers worriedly. "Sir, are we really not going to wait for the Legio III to arrive and go straight to Castellan?" Devers said calmly, "There's no time. This time, Crotone is determined to destroy Dionia. That's why they're already prepared and advancing so quickly. If we wait, it means that we're giving up on Castellan. Not only will it damage the reputation that Dionia has built up, but it'll also let the enemy enter the Zbari plains. It'll also go against the promise we made before. We don't have the confidence to fight against Crotone's militia on the plains. And if we rely on the city walls to defend, it'll take too long. It's not good for our new alliance." Devers took the wooden stick from Felicius and pointed at the curve of the Triontu River on the map. He said in a deep voice, "That's why we have to make full use of this river." Everyone present was clear about Devers's plan. Felicius opened his mouth and finally asked, "Sir Devers, will Crotone lead their army to cross the Triontu River? I heard that their general, Myron, is an experienced general." Devers smiled and said seriously, "No plan can be guaranteed to be fully implemented. However, Myron was fooled by the fake news I released. Seeing how he's so eager to gather his army, and wants to attack the city before we finish gathering, it's very likely that he'll fall into our trap. Of course, if he doesn't fall for it, we can also retreat to Turiae and fight a long defensive battle with Crotone." "He'll fall for it," Drax said, the hope of the generals present. They also did not want Crotone to set foot on Dionia's soil. "How many cavalry do they have?" Leds asked an important question. "About 800, Felicius replied. Leds clenched his fist. Be it in terms of numbers or experience, His cavalry did not have the upper hand. It all depended on whether Sir Devers's amazing strategy would work. Brothers! Devers looked at the generals who had gone through life and death with him and were eager to fight. He knew that there was no need to mobilize them. Their fighting spirit would definitely be high. Therefore, he said calmly, "It's getting late. Return to your teams immediately and act according to the previous plan. Hades will protect us. Everything will go smoothly tomorrow." Yes. That night, Crotone's camp was peaceful. Early the next morning, the sky was clear and there was no rain. Myron woke up and felt refreshed. The intelligence from Turii had also arrived in time. Lau's and Nudum's reinforcements had not arrived yet. In the afternoon, 3,000 Turii soldiers were rushing to Castellan. This secret letter should have been sent last night. At the same time, the Crotone warships cruising the coast of Turii in the morning did not see any signs of a large-scale troop movement on the Turii-Castellan Avenue. Myron pondered. Dionia should have already known the arrival of Crotone's army, but they only sent 3,000 reinforcements when they were still in the midst of war mobilization. But they want to defend Castellan with just 3,000 people? As far as he knew, even with the addition of Castellan's soldiers, there would not be more than 4,000. Furthermore, the small city of Castellan was less than 4 meters tall. It could not stop Crotone's army from crossing the Trionto River and capturing Castellan. Myron even hoped that Castellan would send all their troops to stop him from crossing the river, so that he could deal the most damage to them in the wilderness and easily capture the city of Castellan. The weather and the enemy's situation were all in Crotone's favor. This was the blessing of Apollo. Crotone had to seize the moment when the Dionia alliance had not completed their war mobilization and the army had not yet assembled and arrived. They had to cross the Trionto River quickly, capture Castellan as soon as possible, and then fight the Dionia army. After Myron immediately discussed with Philadelphus, they came up with a plan to cross the river. Under Myron's repeated urging, the army quickly assembled. Among them, 22,000 soldiers were led by Myron and marched northwest, while the other 4,500 soldiers and 500 horsemen were led by Philadelphus and marched north. There were two ideal places to cross the Trionto River. One was located in the middle, where the water was shallow and the riverbank was flat, and the walkable section was more than 2 miles long. This was where the Devers crossed the river to ambush Melanchus. The other was located downstream, west of Castellan, where the river was shorter and deeper. The Crotone's plan to cross the river was that Philadelphus would lead 5,000 men to distract the enemy, but they would not cross the river immediately. Myron's army would cross the river at full speed through the wide section in the middle. The Crotone army led by Myron was arranged in 8 columns, forming a long line of 4 to 5 miles long. Riding in the middle of the army, Myron's ears were filled with the noise of footsteps and the clashing of armors. But he found it pleasing. The huge army gave him enough confidence. He even had the leisure to think. Castellan and Cremissa were both built on the north bank of the river because they were originally the children of Sybaris. They were close to Sybaris and were wary of Crotone. After this war, they must be forced to move their cities to the south bank. As for Turii, if everything went well, he did not mind destroying it for the 4th time. General, the scouts crossing the river were surrounded by enemy cavalry. 4 were killed and 2 escaped. Did you find anything? They saw thousands of enemies marching along the north bank. Chapter 208. Not yet. Inform the front line to slow down the march, and let Philadelphus make a bigger noise to attract the enemy's attention. Also let Alisosis, the captain of the Crotone cavalry, withdraw the scouts. Now that the situation is clear, don't waste our cavalry. Yes, sir. After giving the order, Myron's eyes turned to the woods in front of him. He was quite familiar with this place, because through it, further west was the place where Melanchus' army was ambushed. After the peace treaty with Dionia was signed, Myron personally led the team to carry out thousands of corpses from there, some from the Alliance, some from Crotone. The tragic scene was unforgettable for him for a long time. Myron pulled the reins tightly. This time, Crotone would wash away the shame and avenge them. The troops walked out of the woods, and in front of them was a flat and elevated wilderness. The Trionto River narrowed here, so the water was too deep for them to cross. This was also the reason why Melanchus had camped here. Enemy! Look at the enemy! The soldiers near the river bank were agitated. In front of the troops, on the other side of the Trionto River, a heavily armed Daionia army was marching quickly along the river bank to the west. It seemed that the Daionia had found out their movements and were ready to stop them from crossing the river. Myron was not too worried. Although he could not see the full picture of the enemy on the other side, he felt that the number of people in the army was not too large. As stated in the secret letter, the vanguard sent by Daionia to Castellan was less than 4,000 people, and they also had to defend against Philadelphus. How many enemies would be left to stop his army from crossing the river? The upper reaches of the Trionto River flowed in a narrow valley between the mountains until it rushed out of the canyon and encountered flat lowlands. Like a child out of control, it happily expanded its territory to both sides, causing the river to be 30 to 40 meters wide. The water flow also slowed down, and after flowing slowly for more than 2 miles, the river became narrower and deeper again due to the elevation of the terrain. At this moment, on the south bank of the Trionto River, Myron arranged his 22,000 soldiers, including 2,000 light infantry, into a long formation that was 10 rows thick and more than 2 miles long, covering the entire walkable section of the river. There were only about 5,000 enemies on the other side of the river, and they also formed a formation that was as long as Crotone's, but not only was it obviously thin, but the formation was also very loose. Myron firmly believed that even with the help of the Trionto River, the Dionysian army would not be able to stop the advance of the Crotone army. Their thin line would inevitably be broken by the heavy Crotone army. Attack! Myron, who was at the rear of the middle road, ordered the bugler in a heroic manner. The loud and sonorous sound of the bugler resounded across the quiet Trionto River. Other than the 2,000 soldiers that Myron personally led at the rear of the middle road, he did not move because he felt that the number of soldiers on his side far exceeded the enemy's. There was no need for all of them to participate in the battle. The entire square formation began to move slowly towards the river bank. Columns was one of the 20,000 soldiers. After he was captured by the Daionia, he had been detained for half a year to build a road. He had suffered a lot, and his family had to pay a huge debt in order to ransom him. This time, he was recruited by the city-state to fight against Daionia again. Other than a strong desire for revenge, he also hoped to defeat the Daionia and obtain a lot of spoils of war to pay off his debt. The river bank here was not made of soft fine sand. Instead, it was covered with pebbles of different shapes and sizes. The ground was hard, but it was easy to trip. Hence, Columns and the rest walked slowly and steadily. The Trionto River was right in front of them. Columns, who was at the front, looked through the narrow eye-hole of Corinth's helmet and saw many people rushing out from the enemy's formation on the other side of the river. Without waiting for the captain's reminder, he had already quickly raised his round shield and placed it in front of his chest. Ding! The arrows of the Daionia soldiers hit his bronze shield and produced ear-piercing sounds. However, they could not damage it at all. His right foot had already stepped into the river. "Watch out for the top of your head!" The captain's shout echoed in the dense helmet. His voice was weak and seemed distant. He raised his head subconsciously and saw countless black dots falling from the sky. "Damn it, it's projectiles!" He hurriedly raised his shield to protect his head. At this moment, he heard the captain's anxious shout again, "Watch out for the front!" However, the hearing and vision of the heavily armored soldiers were severely impaired, causing their reactions to be slower than ordinary people. Many of them could not react quickly enough to see what was ahead of them, including Columns. He felt as if someone had punched him lightly in the chest, and then there was a slight pain. An arrow had pierced into his left chest, and it should have already penetrated through the layers of tightly woven linen armor, but its kinetic energy had already been exhausted. The tip of the arrow had just touched his skin, and the experienced Columbus knew that the damage was actually not that great. However, his teammate beside him was shot in the thigh that was not protected by his armor. He screamed in pain and fell into the river. Fresh blood immediately dyed the river red. Looking at his teammate who was struggling in the water, Columns wanted to help him, but he did not have the strength to do so. The cunning Dionia soldiers used projectiles and direct shots at him at the same time. Looking at his teammate who finally stopped struggling and floated on the river, Columns felt a sense of sorrow in his heart. "Stride forward! Stride forward!" The captain shouted and urged the soldiers to speed up to cross the river. The river was indeed not deep, just above their knees. It was just that there were many cobblestones at the bottom of the river, making it a little slippery. Therefore, Columns and the rest squatted down and used round shields to protect their heads and chests. With the protection of the river water to protect their legs, the chances of being hit by the arrows were greatly reduced. However, they could not speed up their advance. After the initial panic, the soldiers gradually calmed down. They moved forward slowly while protecting themselves from the arrows. At the same time, in the process of moving forward, they readjusted their formation that was a little chaotic just now. They were almost at the middle of the river, but the depth of the water did not increase by much. Even Columns, who was on the right wing of the phalanx, did not feel the impact of the water because the long formation on the left was blocking the river. At this moment, he noticed that some people had rushed out from the enemy's formation on the other side of the river. They had almost reached the river and were less than 20 meters away from them. The tip of the spear in their hands shone with a cold light under the sunlight. Columns' heart beat wildly. He instinctively sat down, almost immersing his entire body in the water. "Be careful of the javelins." The captain's voice was obviously much louder. That was because the damage of the javelins to the heavy infantry was obviously greater than that of the arrows. Then, Columns heard the whistling sound of the wind, followed by a bang sound. The teammate behind him let out a shrill cry. The javelin pierced straight into the round shield. The tip of the javelin pierced through the copper skin, smashed the wooden plank, and directly nailed his left arm. The strong impact pushed him backward, and at the same time, brought down the soldiers behind him. If it were not for the timely help of the teammates beside them, these heavily armored soldiers would have had their mouths and noses seeped into by the seemingly gentle and harmless river water, causing them to choke and eventually suffocate. It could be seen that the strength of the enemy's javelin throwing was great, causing the front line of the Crotone army to panic again. At this time, the light infantry at the back of the formation also followed closely behind. They could finally start to fight back. The arrows they threw fell like raindrops on the opposite bank of the river, forcing the enemy's javelin throwers not to recklessly attack the front line at close range. The casualties of the Crotone army were only a drop in the ocean compared to the huge army. Although Myron felt a little heartache, he did not take it to heart. He was only surprised that nearly half of the 5,000 enemy soldiers on the opposite bank were light infantry. These light infantry were skilled in coordination, ingenious in tactics, and ruthless in their attacks. He had never seen this in previous battles, and this raised his vigilance. However, the outcome of this battle was unquestionable, because, "General, our army has reached the shore. We have reached the shore." His subordinates beside him cheered. Previously, Myron thought that crossing the Trihanto River would be very easy. However, looking at the corpses floating on the surface of the river and the relieved expression on his subordinates' faces, it was obvious that the enemy's light infantry was much stronger than he had expected. "Beat the war drums. Don't let them escape." Riding on his horse, Myron could vaguely see that when the front line of his troops stepped onto the river, the enemy's light infantry had already quickly passed through the gaps in their formation and retreated to the rear. "Yes, General." As soon as the messenger finished speaking, they heard the loud sound of a bugle from the opposite bank. The deafening sound could only be produced by at least 10 buglers blowing at the same time. Myron could not hide the shock in his heart. Could it be that the troops that Dionia sent to Castellan were more than the 5,000 to 6,000 soldiers at the front? This shocking thought flashed through Myron and his subordinates' minds at the same time. Their eyes were fixed on the back of the opposite bank. Dong! 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 The war drums were quickly beaten, and the sound reached the ears of Columns, who had already reached the shore. It made him excited. Attack! Attack! Without the attacks of arrows and javelins, the officers' orders were filled with excitement. The Crotone soldiers shouted the name of the god, Apollo, loudly as they took large strides and charged towards the enemy in front of them. However, an even louder battle cry came from the opposite side. A dark red military flag suddenly rose from the back of the river. What followed next was an endless line of soldiers that were arranged closely together. Under the same impassioned war drums, they quickly rushed towards their comrades who were acting as bait in front of them. The military flags that were raised one after another and fluttered in the wind evoked the painful memories of the Crotone soldiers, who were once captives like Columns. Chapter 209. Not only the soldiers, but the moment the Dionia army appeared, Myron's mind also went blank. His body trembled and his face turned pale. He knew that he had been deceived. He had been deceived by the cunning Dionia soldiers. He thought that the enemy was too small, but he rashly allowed his army to cross the river in front of the enemy's equally large army. To any qualified general, this was an extremely wrong military action. However, it was too late to retreat now. Retreating in front of the enemy, and having to turn back to cross the river, was a great taboo for the citizen soldiers of a city that did not have much training. It would mean a great defeat without a battle. The Dionia soldiers could easily attack and turn the seemingly gentle Triontu River into the graveyard of the Crotone militia. Myron did not expect that the battle between the Crotone and Dionia would suddenly start at this place. However, in the face of this decisive battle that would determine the fate of the city, he forced himself to calm down. He threw his guilt and fear to the back of his mind and focused on the battle in front of him. Sound all the bugles. Sound all the war drums. Let the soldiers charge forward. Bravely cross the river. Only then will we have the hope of winning. He anxiously raised his arms and shouted. The messengers immediately leaped into the river and shouted. The sudden increase in the sound of the bugles and war drums urged the army to move forward. The officers in the formation also knew that the situation was dangerous, so they took the lead and moved forward. The Crotone army began to speed up, but the Dionysian army reorganized their formation quickly and closed in on them. Due to the cobblestones all over the ground, both sides did not charge forward like the heavy infantry battles in the past. Instead, they approached each other steadily. When the distance between the two sides was only about 20 meters, Corbouz saw the enemies on the opposite side suddenly stop moving forward when the officer shouted. The enemies in the front row slightly crouched down, while the enemies in the back row glowed with cold light. He immediately knew what was going to happen when he saw the movements of the enemy. He did not even have the time to say the word javelin before he hastily crouched down. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. The continuous whistling sounds were like a sudden gust of wind, accompanied by the rising and falling screams of agony. In the blink of an eye, the entire front row of Crotone's army collapsed. Not only did it stop the advance of Crotone's soldiers, but it also caused their formation to become somewhat fragmented. However, the Dionia did not stop there. Another round of javelins was thrown. At such a close distance, the lethality of the heavy javelin was quite astonishing. Just as the Crotone soldiers were busy dodging the javelins and rescuing their comrades, causing their formation to fall into disarray, the Dionia soldiers took the opportunity to advance. They rammed their shields into the terrified Crotone soldiers, while 2 or 3 javelins stabbed at the enemies who had just survived the javelins. If it wasn't for the back line filling in the gaps in time, Crotone's front line would have collapsed. However, because of this, Crotone's troops were blocked by the river bank. Myron's meticulously prepared battle formation of more than 20 rows became a problem at the moment. In most sections of the river, half of them were on the river bank, while the other half were in the river. In a battle between heavy infantry, other than face-to-face combat, they could also use the thickness of their formation to push the opponent in a way similar to a tug-of-war to achieve a breakthrough. This was another effective way to attack. However, not only could the Crotone soldiers not form an effective united force, but they were also slowly retreating under the powerful push of the opponent. When the javelins that covered the sky flew into the Crotone formation, Myron felt that his heart was about to stop beating. The heavy infantry of Dionia could actually throw javelins. At this moment, Myron regretted being too careless. He did not understand the tactical characteristics of the Dionysian army in more detail. Looking at their light infantry and heavy infantry, this was obviously a well-trained unit with unique tactics. Just as Myron was grieving over the casualties of his soldiers and regretting his negligence, his subordinates stared at the battle on the other side of the river and shouted anxiously, "Damn it, Dionia have so many heavy infantry. It must be because the reinforcements of Nudum and Laos have arrived." Indeed, according to the reports from the messengers on the left and right, the Dionia's formation was almost the same length, and they were able to force their formation to retreat. Although they had the advantage of the terrain, the thickness of their formation was probably not much thinner than their formation. Could it be that the current Dionia also had about 20,000 men? Listening to his subordinate's scolding, it was like a bolt of lightning flashed across Myron's mind. Bent on revenge, he had always carefully studied the secret reports sent back by Turin, so he had some understanding of the Dionia alliance. He remembered that the secret report said that it would take at least 3 days for Turin to reach Nudum, and the same time to reach Laos. So even if the mobilization order of the cavalry was sent to Nudum and Laos, it would still take 6 days to reach Turin and back. After all, the construction of Turin, Nudum and Laos had only just begun, and it had only been 4 days since the declaration of war, unless Dionia had mobilized its troops in advance. However, 3 days ago, before the mercenaries attacked Cremissa, he had tortured several captives, including Criano and Tolikos. They all admitted that they had concealed their intentions from the Devers and decided to capture Cremissa on their own. Therefore, the reinforcements of Nudum and Laos should still be on their way to Turin. So where did so many Dionia heavy infantry come from? There were not so many citizens of Turin and Amendola. Myron was sure of this. He suddenly remembered something. Freedmen? The so-called registered freedmen of Dionia. Myron suddenly remembered that the previous secret report also mentioned that Dionia frequently organized their freedmen to undergo military training. Myron also remembered that many members of the Crotone assembly mocked Dionia for being so desperate that they turned the uncouth freedmen into citizens of the city. It was simply ridiculous. But everything before him proved that Dionia's method was effective. The armor and spears that these poor freedmen were wearing were probably from the Crotone army that died or were captured in the last battle. Despite his anger, Myron clearly realized that Turin had sent these freedmen to the battlefield. They had probably used everything they had. Did they have any extra troops? Myron looked at the battlefield in front of him, and his spirit was lifted. "Euthydemus! What's the matter, General?" The subordinate who was yelling just now replied. "Immediately lead these 2,000 soldiers to the east and hand them over to Philadelphus." "What? Didn't you want this unit to reinforce the middle?" Euthydemus asked in confusion. "Carry out the order." Myron's eyes widened. His good friend's son was really hard-working, but he was too active. Tell General Philadelphus that there won't be too many enemies on the other side. Tell him to cross the river as soon as possible, regardless of the casualties. After defeating the enemy, he will rush over to attack Dionia's army. The victory or defeat of this battle depends on his actions, Myron said solemnly. Understood. Euthydemus saw the chance of victory after Myron's reminder. He rushed to carry out the order excitedly. Myron jumped off his horse. With a spear and shield in hand, he led the guards into the river and joined the battle formation. He kept yelling for the soldiers to fight bravely. Since most of the Dionia's heavy infantry was made up of preparatory citizens, he did not believe that these novices, who were still freedmen half a year ago and had no experience in heavy infantry combat, could master the essence of heavy infantry combat in half a year. This was where his confidence came from. He firmly believed that even if the Crotone soldiers were in danger, they would still be able to hold on until Philadelphus's army arrived. A large flag was erected high in the middle of the Dionia's army. The statue of Pluto Hades was also inlaid at the top, but it was obviously larger than the army flag of the Legion. The flag was also larger, and only the large golden letters, Devers, were embroidered on it. There were currently 3 legions in the Dionia alliance. Devers, of course, had to step down and return to his original position. According to the old tradition, the consul was originally the commander of the city's army. Therefore, the highest position of the Devers in the Alliance army was the commander-in-chief of the Dionia Alliance army. At this moment, the Devers were also paying attention to the movements of the enemy on the other side of the river. Lord Commander, the enemy's troops have gone downstream, Aristocrates reminded loudly. As a talent that the Devers had taken a fancy to, the Devers intended to train him comprehensively like the assists. Therefore, they allowed him to follow them during the battle. However, after all, he was still a freedman, so he could only temporarily be given the title of a clerk. The Devers had been waiting for this moment for a long time. Tormid! Lord Commander, please give the order. Tomamides's reply came from the bottom of his heart. Originally, the Crotone's rapid advance was far beyond the expectations of the generals. In the case that the troops of Nudum and Laos could not arrive in time, the difference in strength between the two sides was a little big. During the military meeting, many people proposed to give up on reinforcing Castellan and hold on to Turin until the reinforcements arrived before the decisive battle. However, the Devers stood their ground and insisted on pushing the front line to Castellan. Due to the prestige that they had built over a long period of time, everyone was finally persuaded by him.